The hero had vanquished the Demon King, bringing peace to the world. But what awaited him? His entire family and friends were executed, and he himself was tortured to death. Embracing the power of darkness, he returned with a heart filled with vengeance, vowing to bathe in the blood of the ungrateful. The truth was clear: the foolish are easily controlled, but the overly righteous are exploited. Bound and standing before the kingdom's princess and others, his face seething with hatred. She had captured him, wanting to eliminate him, for his strength alone surpassed even the Demon King. Thus, to her, he was the only real threat, but his rejection of her love led to his current fate. With an inhuman smile, she ordered her minions to swiftly end his life. Before closing his eyes, he cursed venomously, swearing to return for revenge. Then, the fate of these people would be as small pieces of meat, shredded and thrown to the dogs. He reincarnated and met the goddess of love, condemning her for watching his suffering without intervention. To atone, she agreed to his request to increase his strength, aiding his revenge. A year later, a grand festival was in full swing at the kingdom of Kurz and Auerbach Castle. Praise for the princess's splendor echoed endlessly from the flatterers. The one deemed worthy of the princess was Emil Sama, whom they believed the princess could enchant. The princess was presented with the most exquisite and pure dress, crafted by top tailors. Despite her radiant beauty, her face failed to inspire goodwill. But a second later, she viciously whipped her maid who had just complimented her, dismissing the dress as mediocre and demanding another. The unfortunate maid's body was quickly removed, and another dress was sought. These incidents might bode ill for the upcoming parade. The kingdom had been plagued by headaches recently, so every issue required attention. A month ago, all the guards at the city gates were murdered, followed by another group of soldiers found drowned in a pool of blood. The crime scene was flooded with water from an unknown source, raising suspicions. The royal investigation team was promptly dispatched to investigate but returned with no leads. Commander Sandler of the Royal Army decided to speak with Princess Victoria about the situation. Tentatively, he expressed his fear and suggested postponing today's parade. Recent events remained unsolved, leaving the Royal Army in disarray. Even their elite forces were mysteriously killed, and high-ranking officials died from an odd, unexplained illness. However, for the authoritarian Princess Victoria, these incidents seemed irrelevant. Her only concern was that today, not a single hair on her head would be harmed. She declared that if anything happened, the name of the Royal Army would cease to exist in this place. Linking all the events, Sandler proposed postponing the parade. Each of these victims had murmured a blessing for the princess before dying. Yet, Victoria remained indifferent. To her, the primary threats, the Demon King and the hero, were gone. Moreover, today, she had plenty of human shields, including the people and the hero. A cruel woman, she proclaimed herself as the sole entity deserving existence, considering herself the kingdom's treasure. The sacrifice of countless lives meant nothing to her. The parade continued amid the joyful cheers of the populace. They praised Princess Victoria and then Prince Auclair, the eldest son of Count Auclair, destined to marry her. He valued this marriage highly. But enduring him was part of her grand scheme, to bear a son, place him on the throne, seize power, and live out her wicked dreams. Hence, despite his annoyance, Victoria decided to tolerate him to fulfill her ambitions. She glanced at her future husband, pleased with his handsome appearance. Yet, Victoria couldn't forget the captivating, brave eyes of Rual, the hero who had rejected her and was unjustly led to his death. But now, that no longer mattered. The wedding began with the people's praises and the priest's blessings. Unexpectedly, the final blessing was a prayer for the princess. As she realized where she had heard these words before, it was too late, her groom's head had already fallen to the ground. The priest removed his hat, revealing fiery red eyes filled with hatred and rage. Victoria was shocked and frightened, unable to comprehend how Rual, whom she witnessed dying, could now stand before her. But this was Rual, the hero reborn from the depths of hell, here to avenge himself. If she was puzzled, Rual didn't hesitate to explain why he was there. Initially, he was granted strength by the goddess of love to save innocent humans from the Demon King. However, he never anticipated that humans could be so ungrateful as to kill their savior. Thus, Blinded by her love, the goddess gave him more power and helped him resurrect to carry out his revenge. Despite not wanting to trouble the goddess, he was also tormented because of these deities. After presenting an ultimatum, he decided to begin his vengeance. He was determined to achieve his goal, warning everyone not to stand in his way. Only purified souls could ascend to heaven, any god breaking this rule would face his wrath. He asked the goddess to unleash the dark power within him, even if it meant being consumed by darkness. The goddess, bewildered, asked why he wouldn't choose to stay in heaven and enjoy eternal happiness. But to Rual, his only happiness now was to slaughter the ungrateful. The goddess, blinded by her love for Rual, quickly abandoned right and wrong to help him fulfill his desire. She kissed him, and immediately Rual felt a new energy flowing through him. What remained was to resurrect. Before that, the goddess kissed him goodbye and wished him her blessings. He began his inhuman massacre on the day of Princess Victoria's wedding. The bloodbath he orchestrated was for those who reveled in the murder of his family and were complicit in it. Eagerly stepping over their bodies, he advanced towards the so-called sacred wedding hall of Victoria. His excitement was palpable, bordering on madness, no longer caring about anything around him. For someone pushed to the brink of desperation to the point of resurrection, this was what he had long awaited. A soldier rushed to protect the princess, standing trembling before Rual. The princess, more afraid of being dirted than the person in front of her, screamed hysterically for someone to save her. But Rual was suspected of being a demon's minion, masquerading as a hero to create chaos. Those who didn't pay for the royal feasts under the guise of church donations were labeled as demons' minions. Countless had been slaughtered brutally by the royal army under this pretense. Exposed, the soldier stood frozen, unable to speak. But since Rual was there not for a chat, he decided to grab the princess by her hair and yank her towards him. The people, witnessing Rual with a sword decapitate an entire army with a single stroke, fled in panic. The sight delighted Rual, forcing the princess to watch those who cared only for themselves. He declared he would perform a show where Princess Victoria would be the star. It would be unique and entertaining, especially with a large audience, as he promised a one-of-a-kind performance. The commoners, forced to witness this, were terrified, their cries for help unending. They claimed innocence, but they hadn't thought twice when cheering for the execution of Rual's family. They loudly called for the princess, now their only hope of salvation, but Victoria herself realized her dire situation. She ordered Sandra to come to her rescue, unaware that Sandra's legs were firmly planted in the ground. In Victoria's eyes, even if Sandra had to cut off her legs to save her, she should do so. Rual, knowing that Sandra was an innocent soldier uninvolved in these events, let her stand there. Today's parade was to announce the princess's wedding, so it couldn't just feature one performer. Turning to Eau Claire, Rual flashed a terrifying smile. In a second, Eau Claire was flung against the princess, continuously crying for his mother. It was laughable that the princess's fiancé was such a mama's boy. Victoria, humiliated and angry, hurled insults but was powerless in Rual's grasp. Rual mocked the princess's red dress as inappropriate for the occasion. Then, with a ripping sound, he tore her dress, leaving her exposed before her subjects. He insinuated if she was eager for a child, he would help fulfill that wish today. To Sandra, this was the lowest of tactics, but they seemed to have forgotten their own deeds. Rual was once hailed by the people, especially in his hometown. Yet, when peace was restored to the kingdom, Victoria ordered the annihilation of his village, gruesomely impaling its inhabitants on spikes. She eagerly anticipated seeing Rual's face upon witnessing this horror. When Rual returned, the scene of his bloodbath-stricken village left him speechless. Ambushed by Sandra, he found his village lifeless, drowned in a sea of blood. Sandra declared that any command from the princess must be obeyed, regardless of the number of lives taken. Rual amplified her confession for all to hear. Her earlier claims of righteousness now fueled the people's outrage. The situation reached a climax, and Rual began to torture the devilish princess. He controlled Sandra to repeatedly punch the princess's face, not stopping until she begged for mercy. But her once beautiful face was nothing but a messy pulp now. Rual commenced his vengeance for his sister's innocent death right there. Before the conquest of the Demon King, a tragedy was about to befall the siblings, unknown to anyone. The sister, with her beautiful faith, smiled kindly at her brother, unaware of what the future held. She always stayed in the church, praying for everyone, especially her brother, before he went to battle. She bid him farewell while heavily pregnant, eagerly awaiting his return. The unborn child longed for a hero to protect it. After completing his mission and returning, Rual was ambushed and brought before the princess. She set fire to the village and blamed Rual, but also offered to save him if he agreed to stay by her side. Rual, despising such cowardice, was angrily sent away by her. He was taken to the church, but as soon as he entered, the stench of blood hit him. Lying before him was the body of his sister in a pool of blood, her eyes still open. Her last words to him before he went to war resonated deeply in his heart. At that moment, he vowed to return and avenge his sister. Rual swore to make the princess understand the fate of those ungrateful to him and his sister. But a voice in his head told him he couldn't kill her swiftly and easily. He must torture her until she begged for release. First, he pinned her to the ground, binding her limbs so she couldn't move. Then came the unexplained stomach pains that made the princess scream as if being slaughtered. Rual kindly reminded her to shut up quickly, as screaming would only make her lose more blood. So, if she didn't want to bleed to death, she should endure in silence. The princess, truly not understanding why this was happening, screamed to know the reason. This was just retribution for all she had done. The soldiers behind were also forewarned by Rual about the punishment they would soon face. But for now, the performance would end here. He decided to stop at this point. Seeing her in a pitiful state on the ground, no longer resembling a human, Rual felt immensely satisfied. He intended to leave, but suddenly she screamed, ordering her soldiers to capture Rual and stab him in the chest. Before she could revel in her supposed revenge, Rual just smiled a demonic smile. Apparently, Victoria had forgotten that he was no ordinary hero. Such stabs meant nothing to him. He slowly pulled the swords from his chest, feeling no pain. The princess's eyes widened in horror at this sight, unable to believe what she was seeing. Rual knew this was thanks to the goddess's blessing, not like the demon Victoria, who feasted on human flesh. He left, promising to return when the princess regained her beauty. Before leaving, he mockingly wished her a happy wedding, blessing Princess Victoria. His next destination was the church where his sister suffered her eternal injustice. He bowed to her spirit, then burned down the place, vowing never to return. He recounted killing the treacherous priest who betrayed his sister, described how the square was now in chaos. The people were mad, calling for the princess's death, while her stomach was beyond repair. Rual had carefully set traps around the kingdom, ensuring no one could escape. Priest Gustav, living in a grand castle built with extorted money, was shocked to see Rual alive. Despite offering bribes, Rual refused to spare him. He exposed Gustav's truth and killed him by drowning, the same fate Gustav had inflicted on the innocent. Before leaving, Rual assured his sister's spirit that all this was for his own revenge. He comforted her soul and left, preparing for the upcoming act. He swore not to show mercy to anyone, nor forgive any reason given. All guilty parties would pay for their actions. Now, at Auerbach Castle, eerie noises and screams filled the air. Sandra, tied to a wall, endured lashes from Victoria's beloved leather whip, unable to resist. The princess said she was being punished for not severing her legs to save her, and now must bear this punishment. Regardless of anything, Victoria didn't listen to Sandra's explanations, only seeking to take her life. Now, unable to go out and wreak havoc, Victoria blamed everything on Sandra, demanding she endure fitting punishment. Sandra's life was now worth less than a strand of the princess's hair, so she must bear her punishment. Sandra couldn't be killed, not out of Victoria's mercy, but because of some protective shield preventing any harm to her. All blades seemed unable to touch Sandra, as if under a curse. Perhaps it was the hero's magic, driving the princess mad in her pursuit of him. The soldiers, though terrified, could do nothing but quickly follow her orders. Defying the princess or facing the hero meant death for them. Their only task was to find Rual and bring his head to her. This event had the entire country in fear, rendering the royal army useless. They decided to seek the one person who could handle this situation. A soldier, galloping through the forest, sought someone who could help capture Rual. His panicked and anxious demeanor showed the urgency of the situation. On his way, he unexpectedly encountered a group of goblins blocking the path, forcing him to dismount and fight. Not just goblin soldiers, but the Goblin King himself appeared. At that moment, a swordsman emerged, swiftly dealing with them with a few sword strokes. This kind man inquired about the soldier's well-being and helped him up for a conversation. He was the kingdom's top swordsman, the one the princess was desperately trying to summon for help. He was the only one who could assist the princess now. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation was overheard by a strange creature lurking nearby, unnoticed. This man was the kingdom's top swordsman and the people's only hope at that moment. A few days earlier, while dining with his family, he had mentioned needing to go to the capital for a few days. His children knew their father was being summoned to hunt down the notorious hero causing trouble recently. This morning, a messenger had arrived, so the swordsman had to quickly make his way to the capital. His children eagerly anticipated their father's success, hoping he would ruthlessly kill the hero. Coming from a warrior lineage, they were excited for him to return and teach them martial arts in 6 months. The father, contentedly looking at his happy family at the dining table, was unaware of the terrifying future awaiting him. He promised the children he would bring back exciting toys if they were diligent and well-behaved in their studies. His beautiful and gentle wife smiled proudly at him, trusting and supporting him wholeheartedly. A servant approached to ask what meal should be prepared for the royal messenger, but was quickly pulled away by the butler. It was the servant's first day on the job, and he was still learning, but the swordsman, being kind-hearted, didn't mind. He mentioned that the messenger had already left in a hurry, so no special preparation was needed. At that moment, the maid brought in a special dish, a long-standing tradition before the swordsman went to battle. The children, enticed by the aroma, were eager to taste it, but their father stopped them. He explained it was his hunt, and they would have to earn their own if they wanted some. Cutting a big piece of meat, he savored the victorious flavor, thinking about the messenger's effort to secure such excellent game. The next day, at Obertha's northern fortress, the swordsman mounted his horse and bid farewell to his family, heading to the bustling capital. His children obediently followed his instructions to practice and study, but something was amiss. Contrary to their innocent appearance, they were actually hunting their pet. Thinking their father would buy them a new one, they decided to butcher and fry the pet. The terrified dog ran wildly but eventually succumbed to the cruel blows of the children. The two angel-faced devils, bored with the dog's lack of resistance, decided to finish it off. But before they could act, a terrifying voice echoed, freezing them in their tracks. Rual had been standing behind them all along, casually expressing his desire to join in their twisted game. The children's crimes were laid bare under the clear sky, but they showed no fear. It was only when Rual tied them up, hands and feet, leaving them lying on their backs, that they realized the seriousness of the situation. Their cries for help, hoping to be heard by the servants, seemed almost futile. They boasted of being the children of General Brown, warning that if Brown caught Rual, he would not spare him. However, Rual was unfazed by such childish threats. He showed them the scene outside, highlighting the particular situation. The servants were frantically digging up the yard, searching for something mysterious. They didn't dare stop, even without supervision, leaving the children wide-eyed with surprise. Eventually, one of the servants shouted, drawing Rual's attention. They had unearthed a pile of human bones buried in the Browns' garden. This was evidence of General Brown's ruthless and inhumane cruelty. But this was just a small part of it, so Rual ordered them to continue searching. He knew the servants here were complicit, paid off for killing and disposing of bodies. Rotten like their master, Rual couldn't forgive any of them. He grabbed the butler after finding the head of the royal messenger who had just visited the day before. The previous night's barbecue was made from this very person, and no one could deny it. When the butler claimed ignorance, his head was swiftly severed from his body in the blink of an eye. The children suddenly became eager and excited, saying their father would surely return soon. Unbeknownst to them, Lady Brown was standing behind a wall nearby, armed with a poisoned bow and arrow aimed at Rual. She had poisoned it with a substance that could even kill the Goblin King, intending to use it on Rual for dinner that night. But before the children could rejoice, the arrow reversed its course, striking Lady Brown instead. She foamed at the mouth and convulsed in front of her children, much to Rual's satisfaction. Realizing they had no one left to rely on, the children quickly backed away in fear. Rual gleefully anticipated that it was now time for these little devils to face his judgment. On one side, General Brown was ordering a soldier to fetch water for his horse when suddenly, he was captivated by a beam of light. Appearing before him was the royal messenger from the previous day, followed by Rual. Rual spoke to Brown, urging him to hurry home as his children were still waiting for him. This ignited a foreboding feeling in the father's heart, leading him to abandon everything and swiftly rush back to his mansion. Meanwhile, Rual sat leisurely under a tree, waiting for the homeowner's arrival and pondering life. Sitting like this was rather boring, but that wasn't a reason for Rual to indulge in murder as a form of entertainment. However, upon reflection, he realized the dark power he possessed was quite convenient, allowing him to see through people's dark pasts. The servants before him were once people Rual had risked his life to save. But ironically, they turned out to be real demons, taking lives for their amusement. If one didn't know better, they would only see the tip of the iceberg. Before Rual could ponder further, General Brown arrived, standing before him with a face that seemed to burn with fury. He wasn't surprised or scared, but slowly rose to his feet, locking eyes with Brown. It seemed Brown had returned at an alarming speed, fearing for his children's safety. Above Rual was the lady of the house, in a state of undress and covered in blood. The cuts on her body were the handiwork of Brown's beloved children, manipulated by Rual into becoming obedient and insane. While Brown was seething with anger, desperately wanting to find his children, Rual advised him not to act rashly. Instead, he suggested Brown take a closer look at his wife to discover something special. Rual's intention was to remind Brown of something important that he needed to deeply engrave in his memory. The children were still safe, so there was no need to worry excessively about them. However, Brown, unwilling to waste words, quickly drew his sword, intending to attack Rual. But no matter how skilled and fast Brown was, he couldn't match even a fraction of Rual's abilities. Rual easily dodged the attack and laughed, commending Brown for his effort but advising him to try harder next time. He stared intently at his wife's body, trying to recall a similar scene from his memory but failing to do so. Rual decided not to waste more time and directly revealed the similarity. The scene resembled the one from Rual's village, Baden, where everything tragic was directly connected to General Brown. Back then, Baden was a peaceful little village devoid of crime or sin. Rual was happily picking mushrooms for dinner and bragging to his sister, after which they returned to their small but cozy home. A simple yet lovingly prepared family dinner awaited them. Rual was about to sit down but was reminded by his mother to wash his hands, a scene that would forever stay with him. This tiny village, nestled in the remote western part of the Kurz kingdom, was where Rual's family of 3 lived a tranquil life until that fateful day. While playing with a bunny, Rual and his sister saw Hans, covered in blood, emerge from the bushes. This was followed by terrifying noises and desperate cries for help from the neighbors. Rual's mother couldn't survive, she died right in front of him. The image of his poor mother hung on the trunk of an ancient tree, naked, deeply etched into Rual's heart. This was why he made Mrs. Brown's body look the same. But at that time, General Brown arrived, apologizing for being late and inviting Rual to the palace. Rual accepted, trusting him, unaware that all this was a human doing. The light radiating from Rual was deemed the embodiment of a true hero. He was taken to the kingdom and trained to fight against the Demon King. The people there brainwashed him daily, insisting that all the world's suffering was caused by the Demon King. But all this made Brown realize that these were just manipulations to make the boy seek revenge for his mother. Delighted, he laughed loudly, wanting to tell Rual the story of his mother. At that time, she was trying to protect a dying child, so Brown decided to cook her right in front of that child. Brown, thinking that recounting such a story would drive Rual insane and expose a vulnerability, was mistaken. Rual sneered, fully aware of Brown's bizarre taste for cannibalism, finding nothing surprising. Brown laughed, believing that despite everything, he was still the strongest in the kingdom, and Rual was just a frail boy. For Rual, facing such self-proclaimed strongest individuals was easier. Brown, aware of Rual's heroic status, didn't care much for it. So, if Rual was brave enough, he wanted him to rush in and face his sword. The battle would indeed be exciting if Brown could withstand even Rual's simplest attacks. Brown's children were still in Rual's grasp, so to save them, Brown would have to step over Rual's dead body. Brown, in his arrogance, claimed this wouldn't be difficult. However, despite Brown's best efforts and complex moves, Rual mocked him. These moves only made Rual feel underestimated. Before Brown could process this, Rual announced it was his turn to attack. Rual, ablaze with fury, charged at Brown, pinning him helplessly under a tree. Despite Brown's resistance, Rual continued to pummel him, causing him to cough up blood. Brown lay beneath his wife's corpse, unable to accept this reality. He was the strongest in the kingdom, how could things turn out this way? Even flattened on the ground, he cast a hateful glare at Rual, wanting to continue the fight. But for Rual, this was hardly a challenge and rather amusing. Brown might stand a slight chance if he gave his all, but victory was still out of reach. Rual planted the sword that had accompanied Brown in his past massacres in front of him, urging him to pick it up and continue fighting. But as Brown crawled towards the sword, Rual kicked him away, sending him flying meters away. This repeated process of Brown struggling towards the sword and being thrown back amused Rual greatly. However, noticing Brown couldn't take much more and with dinner time approaching, Rual decided to end their playful fight there. Despite some disappointment with Brown's strength, who was reputed to be the strongest in the kingdom, Rual felt quite satisfied. Brown couldn't accept this outcome, as it seemed unbelievable that he was defeated by just a boy. Renowned and undefeated until now, this result was inconceivable to him. Rual told him he must accept the reality of being a loser and prepare for his dinner. Since the sword was no longer needed, Rual assumed Brown wouldn't need his hands either. With a strong pull, Rual detached both of Brown's hands from his arms. This would be Brown's dinner tonight, and Rual intended to make it especially unique. Rual planned a lavish dinner, where Brown would experience the agony Rual had suffered because of him. After the battle, a grand dinner was set by the chef, Rual himself. The guests were Brown and his 2 children. Brown, furious, was immobilized, and his children were unconscious, thanks to a drug produced by their mother. Rual had found this drug while hiding the children, realizing the mother had brainwashed the servants. Brown's wife's family owned the largest drug manufacturing house in the country, and crafting this particular drug was an elaborate process. Rual's next visit would be to Brown's wife's family, and he intended to speak on Brown's behalf. The grill prepared by Rual was ready, and the dinner officially began. The main course was the flesh of Brown's children, freshly cooked right at the table. This ensured the meal's freshness and appeal, which Rual found particularly enjoyable. Ignoring Brown's pleas and threats, Rual continued to slice the children's flesh, even flaunting it in front of Brown, driving him to madness. Rual kindly seasoned and marinated the meat, enhancing its flavor. Remembering Brown no longer had hands to feed himself, Rual fed him bite by bite. Brown could only bite and then spit out, followed by a barrage of curses. Rual was only replicating what Brown had done, especially considering Brown's fondness for cannibalism. Rual made use of every usable part of Brown's daughter, leaving nothing to waste. Turning to Brown's son, Rual inquired which part Brown would prefer. However, Brown, seeing his son as the heir to his lineage, pleaded for the boy's life. But Brown had shown no mercy when Rual's mother begged for her life. Instead, he acted even more cruelly and inhumanly. Now, not just the children, but Brown himself had to endure such torment. He would lose some body parts and endure slices of flesh being cut from his body, just like Rual's mother had suffered. Screams echoed through the mansion, but there was no one left to save Brown. This was the hellish retribution he faced for his past crimes against the innocent. Rual sat down on the grassy ground, looking up at the sky, exhaling a sigh of relief. All this was just the beginning, and the dead body before him sparked no interest. They needed to suffer a fate worse than death to bring Rual any sense of satisfaction. The next act in his play was the famous drug-producing family of Mrs. Brown, where he would act as a divine executioner, cleansing the world of its filth. The Altman National Resort, home to the Food Research Institute, was where Mrs. Brown's family resided. The painful screams emanating from there struck fear and horror in those who heard them. A young girl, tied to a laboratory table and treated like an object, struggled desperately. The experiment was to determine how much of the human body could be removed before death ensued. The cruel woman holding the syringe was Dr. Rinne Benek. Her laboratory was used to create inhumane things, satisfying her morbid curiosity. She dissected innocent boys and girls, immersing their bodies in solutions for long-term studies. Sometimes, it was just to satisfy her desire to collect bizarre specimens. Brains were removed from bodies to see what extraordinary things they could become. What if the human brain was replaced with that of a monkey? What would happen then? At this moment, she was sitting in her private room, engaging in nefarious activities, when she heard a knock on the door. A man entered to report that they had just captured 2 more women for the experimental purposes of this facility. This man was the military advisor Lucas Eckhart, who didn't hesitate to engage in such dirty work solely for money. Piles of body bags were stacked in front of her, drawing her utmost attention. He stubbornly demanded payment until the researcher reluctantly promised to pay him by the end of the day, using an irritable tone. What he cared about wasn't how many lives were needed but when he would receive his payment. After getting rid of this nuisance, she continued her discussion with the head of the facility. He aimed to create an army of immortal soldiers, to prevent them from being rapidly annihilated while battling various monsters. This bearded, unkempt man was Lord Dha Costa, the overseer of the Research Institute. But wouldn't it be disadvantageous if these beings became immortal, leaving nothing but a wasteland once destroyed? To limit this, she devised a drug that would cause them to self-destruct after a certain period. This also helped them identify the best genetic strains and select the most suitable species. To the overseer, this was a brilliant idea, flawless and not requiring further discussion. The son of the head of the institute, Johannes, went directly to the coronavirus isolation ward, intending to bring the patients to the laboratory. He claimed to have found a suitable antidote and wanted to cure these people. But everyone knew this was a scheme to test their insane drug on humans. Hearing about the possibility of being cured and joining the ranks of nobility, these people went mad with excitement. They didn't care about the consequences or what they had to sacrifice, they were solely focused on offering themselves. Those below tore each other apart for the chance to be experimental subjects. Watching this, the wicked doctors smiled with satisfaction. Their desperate craving for the drug meant it was time to accelerate the experiments. However, it took numerous attempts to refine the right formula, which required a high number of test subjects. Ultimately, what they achieved was the creation of what came to be known as the Berserkers. The final step was to distribute this drug to the battlefield. The soldiers called in for transport were incredibly eager, as this was a significant event. But to get past the dangerous forest monsters, they would have to use the drug themselves. Lady Brown's endeavor to transform humans into a type of monster had begun. Now, the only one who could save the world was Rual. More ready than ever for this battle, he was determined to make these inhumane fiends pay for their actions. At the Altman Resort, part of the Research Institute, the head of the institute was going mad with the news of his daughter's family being murdered. How could his son-in-law, hailed as the strongest in the kingdom, let such a tragedy happen? The kind-hearted brother wanted to bribe the army commander to send troops for protection. But being selfish and not wanting to end up like his sister, his face was pale with fear. Benek was surprisingly calm, confident in her own concocted drug. As long as she had it, even the arrival of a hero posed no problem. The two began arguing, as they truly didn't know how to poison the hero. However, it wasn't the time for disputes, so the head of the institute yelled to stop them. The only person summoned to assist them was the influential Lucas. With Lucas around, they were better off than having 200 soldiers there. According to what he had learned from the royal secret letters, the hero had returned with a vengeance. Hearing this, the son went mad, knowing the heinous crimes they had committed. The head of the institute tried to cover up his son's panic but couldn't deceive Lucas. But just as Benek had said, to them, the hero was nothing but a fool, oblivious to the ways of this world. To them, Rual was merely a deranged, ungrateful lunatic returning to wreak havoc. However, they couldn't do anything unless they revealed the truth to Lucas. The head of the institute, though reluctant about sharing classified information, ultimately disclosed it for his own safety. He had done something to the soldiers in a battle years ago, which drove them to madness. Lucas was confident in his strength, comparable to General Brown, and believed nothing could hinder his progress. The Institute's family had no choice but to place all their trust in Lucas. Their secrets were already known to him, so now they were all in the same boat. But just as they began to feel a bit relieved, a loud explosion and bizarre images outside the window startled them. They shouted for Lucas, but the strange figures seemed to be trying to communicate something. The game proposed by the skull was a hide-and-seek, survival through the night meant escape. With 231 people in the research institute, none would be spared for their misdeeds. They had 10 minutes to hide, and then the search would begin. Lucas tried to reassure everyone that this was just a tactic to cause panic. The recent occurrences were mere magic, but these people must have transgressed moral and ethical boundaries. They had experimented with the transformation drug on innocent soldiers, resulting in their unjust deaths. Among them might have been the hero's relatives, so now he was here for revenge. However, there were still unresolved mysteries, so they decided to check the storage of the drug first. Arriving there, they found nothing but empty wooden shelves, except for a single small bottle and a note indicating the hero had been there first. This left them like puppets in Rual's hands, directionless. All remaining drugs were now in the hero's possession, putting them at a complete disadvantage. Benek was about to escape through the window but was suddenly blinded by a bright light and fell to the ground. The skull's words were no joke, and it was clear the hero had indeed returned, operating under the principle of an eye for an eye. Rual, carrying the skinned and horrifically grotesque corpse of the general, arrived here intent on staging a macabre game. The sight was so shocking that those present couldn't bear it and fled in utter panic. Delighted, Rual announced the rules of a sinister hide-and-seek game, quickly spreading terror among them. He manipulated the dead general's body to slaughter those too paralyzed with fear to hide. However, they had a chance for mercy if they agreed to drink a concoction developed right here. The chase was ruthless, sparing no one. The swift might survive, but the slow had only death as an option. Now was not a time for kindness, it was every man for himself. Overwhelmed by fear and cowardice, they selfishly trampled over each other in a desperate bid to escape, but they couldn't outrun Rual's magic and were swiftly captured. Before they could comprehend their plight, Rual forced them to swallow the potion. Within seconds, each victim grew monstrously large and lost control of their mind. This, Rual realized, was the same fate that had befallen the innocent soldiers. He now understood the horrifying actions of the army were due to this terrifying drug. As monsters, they felt an unbearable dryness in their throats and an intense thirst. In a frenzy, they turned on their own colleagues mercilessly. The blood that spurted out quenched their insatiable thirst. The air was filled with screams for help, but Rual took perverse pleasure in this chaos. They were experiencing the same horrors that the innocents had endured. However, Rual didn't allow this monster to kill too many, as he needed them for his plan. They obediently consumed the potion, transforming into a formidable and terrifying army. In the end, 121 people on this floor succumbed to the potion and became the monsters Rual desired. They stood before him, ready to obey his every command unconditionally. The general's corpse, its utility expended, collapsed, splattering blood everywhere, driving the monsters into further frenzy. But these monsters were bound to obey Rual's commands if they wished to satiate their bloodlust. Thus, a monstrous army was born, significantly aiding Rual's vengeful scheme. The monsters became frenzied with thirst, lunging at Rual in a desperate attempt to tear him apart. But their feeble strength, coupled with a lack of rational thought, was no match for him. They charged one after another, only to end up as lifeless corpses, incapable of movement. This was the fate they deserved for creating such a lethal potion. The bodies of these monsters piled up, the pungent smell of blood filling the air, but Rual was unfazed by the stench. If they wished to attack, he was more than willing to engage in a dramatic battle. In the end, only the prominent inventors of this place remained, but their past actions were nothing short of criminal. Therefore, they would endure twice the torment without any hope of forgiveness. For Rual, driving them mad on the battlefield was enough, there was no need for anything more. He was sure their minds were now lost to madness, unable to think or even recognize their own humanity. Soldiers were merely pawns for the masterminds, so preserving their consciousness was not a wise idea. It was the rulers who triumphed, so they should make the country prosper. These were the words constantly repeated by the 231 researchers present. Despite their number, not a single one possessed an innocent or pure soul. The mediocre would die in their mediocrity, and the cunning would perish by their own wits. But the climax was imminent as the potion would self-destruct after 10 minutes, annihilating its host. Heads detached from necks, blood spurting into the air, creating an indescribable scene. This was the moment Rual had eagerly anticipated in his performance. Suddenly, he remembered the young, innocent soldiers of the past. They brought him supplies, expressing their gratitude for Rual's sacrifices. He had fought valiantly for his country, inspired by their hopeful, naive eyes. But in the end, after the war concluded, he was betrayed and killed by his own rear guard. The children, transformed into berserkers for the potion's testing, met their deaths in despair. After observing the results of his work, Rual proceeded to the second floor. There, 110 people would consume the potion, continuing the experiment with his creation. The final act, set on the top floor, would involve those considered the masterminds of this place. Rual methodically executed his plan, joyfully sealing all exits. The institute's director and leaders, unaware of the unfolding events, were in a closed meeting on the top floor. The anxious son, eager to quickly bribe the royal army for protection, was frantic about his own survival. However, the director had to calm his son, admitting their powerlessness in this situation. After all their discussions, they found themselves trapped for 2 hours, rendering their elaborate plans utterly worthless. Finally, Rual reached the top floor and began his own game. The sight of the general's unmistakable image on the window sent them into a frenzy, as everyone knew the general was dead. This meant the image was a patchwork of the general's remains, meticulously assembled by Rual. Hence, it appeared extremely ghastly, just as Rual had hoped they would appreciate his little gift. His mask, made from the general's flesh, signified that from this moment, he would closely monitor everything they did. They were taken back to the moment in the drug storage room. The empty shelves and news that the potion had been tested on all lower floors overwhelmed Benek with shock. Realizing there was no way out, they were forced to start Rual's proposed game of hide and seek. The prospect of hiding in the institute seemed both fun and exciting. In a panic, they pushed and shoved each other, trying to find a safe place to hide, but unsure where true safety lay. Whoever survived this horrific night would live to see the next morning. And among those sitting here, who would be the first to be caught? So, they decided to lock the doors of this room and remain still until morning. However, it was still 6 hours until dawn. What they needed now was to find a room where the hero, Rual, could not find them. Benek took charge of leading everyone to such a place, possibly a secret room unknown to others. She expressed a wish to have some coffee to start the evening, a suggestion not warmly received. But no one dared to contradict her, as she was the only one who knew of the hiding place, unaware of Benek's ulterior motives. She brought coffee to everyone, but Lucas unexpectedly suggested swapping cups with her, wary of her possibly poisoning the drink, given her background in developing deadly drugs. Benek's face registered shock and a fleeting sense of guilt upon hearing this request. But she didn't bother to hide her intentions any longer, as it was time to drop the curtain on this act. She knew the person before her was not Lucas but Rual himself. She realized this because he adhered to the principle of tit-for-tat revenge and knew the letter he had read did not come from the royal family. Rual had overheard everything they had discussed in the room, nothing was hidden from him. This intelligence delighted Rual, as he had meticulously planned everything. This realization marked the beginning of a more intriguing game for the night. Benek was also excited as everyone was now in a sealed space with no escape route. She thought she had won the game of hide and seek by spiking the coffee of 2 people, turning them into berserkers. However, the drug had been upgraded to be 100 times stronger, and they would soon transform. Benek wore a triumphant smile, proud of her flawlessly executed plan. But Rual's question plunged her from heaven into hell. What if everything was just her assumption and the truth had yet to unfold? She tried to salvage her hope, insisting that Rual was the real loser in this battle. Rual's subsequent words drove her to the brink of madness, forcing her to stay alert and carefully consider her next move. But now was the moment for her to relish her triumph, as the drug began to take effect. However, to her surprise, the two individuals showed no signs of transformation. Why were they unaffected when her drug had been successful until now? Rual burst into laughter, declaring that no matter how much time passed, they would not change. The reason, he revealed, was that the drug only worked on living beings. He had expected this girl to be much smarter, but it turned out there was nothing truly interesting about her. He had simply used basic magic to make it appear as if the two had been present in the meeting room all along. In reality, they had been dead for a long time, and Benek was merely laughing at herself. While it took some time to set up this scene, witnessing Benek's confusion was a delightful reward for Rual. He truly viewed these events as mere entertainment. She had thought herself victorious, not realizing she had been surrounded by enemies and had actually lost from the very beginning. As Benek sat on the floor, tears streaming down her face, Rual helped her up and offered some words of comfort. Although she had lost her only weapon, he acknowledged her efforts. He then prepared to show her a stage where she could watch her experiments being carried out. Blindfolded, she was led away, just like the innocent people she had used as guinea pigs. This only added to the excitement and curiosity. When she tried to justify her actions by claiming she was just following orders from above, Rual expressed his disdain for such excuses. When he had dealt with the director and his son, they too had tried to blame Benek for their crimes. But regardless of who lied, in the end, they all shared the same ideas and jointly committed atrocities. Thus, everyone deserved punishment, and there was no need for envy. Blame shifting was now meaningless, so it was better to conserve energy for the upcoming spectacle. First, he threw her into a sea of corpses piled on the floor of the second level, wanting her to witness the fruits of her labor. Benek's screams of pain and refusal to accept this reality echoed through the room. She was forced by Rual to navigate through the pile of monster corpses to open the laboratory door at the end of the corridor. There, the real show was about to take place, and Rual eagerly awaited this part. In the underground laboratory, Benek sat trembling on the floor after witnessing the horrific scenes. However, Rual only sneered, reminding her that she was the one who orchestrated these horrors. Despite having killed countless people in this laboratory, she now played the victim. Rual, refusing to let her feign innocence, listed all her heinous acts. She had dissected a young girl from foot to head while the child screamed in agony. She had also transplanted a monkey's brain into a human, delighting in observing the changes. She had always regarded humans as mere animals, showing no remorse for her barbaric actions. Benek denied everything, claiming it was all fabrication and slander. She thought her actions were so covert that they left no trace, believing Rual had no evidence to accuse her. But for people like her, evidence was no longer necessary. Rual punched her, causing her to stagger and fall. He took her to where the body bags were stored so she could see clearly the undeniable results of her actions. Just as Rual was about to make her experience real agony, she finally broke down and admitted her guilt. However, she claimed it wasn't her choice but that she was unable to defy orders from her superiors. In the end, Benek was just another pawn, failing to make her own decisions and merely following others' commands. She revealed that it wasn't she who sent those innocent soldiers to their deaths but a force behind the scenes. She claimed that the real culprits who doomed the children were the villagers. The drug was effective for only 15 minutes and could be neutralized with water, but the villagers had sealed their gates, refusing the children water and ignoring their pleas. Rual could see a glimmer of hope in Benek's eyes as she spoke those words. But at that very moment, he planned to crush any remaining hope she had. He had his own reasons to seek revenge on the village, but wasn't Benek the one directly responsible for the tragedy? Realizing there was no salvation left for her, she fell into complete despair. Now, it was time for the performance Rual had been most anticipating this evening. He summoned two monsters created by Benek herself to drag her away. Once securely tied to the experimental chair, Benek finally grasped the gravity of her situation. Whether she would live long depended solely on her body's resilience, so Rual wished her luck with a hint of irony. Benek's screams were heart-wrenching, and perhaps now she understood the feelings of those she had so mercilessly experimented on. Rual took the cherished test tubes from the shelf, which Benek had once handled with care. Now, she was forced to consume all the contents of those bottles, the very creations she had crafted. Within seconds of reacting, her throat became parched and burning as if scorched by fire, followed by an uncontrollable wetting of herself. This embarrassing scene was further marred by a foul-smelling fart, causing Rual to wrinkle his nose. The intense stomach pain left her too delirious to feel any shame. This was followed by violent vomiting, turning her into a filthy, gushing mess. In agony, Benek pleaded with Rual for release, but he refused. He offered to temporarily boost her body's stats, but only for a specific duration. However, if she agreed, he would still allow her to drink an antidote. But the critical condition was that she must prepare it herself, right in front of him. Despite her trembling hands and clouded mind, this was her only path to salvation at the moment. This seemed impossible, yet Rual generously granted her this last favor. She had to seize the opportunity quickly, as soon she would not even be able to stand. Rushing to the laboratory table, she muttered about not dying while working feverishly. After several failed attempts, she finally succeeded, a gleeful smile spreading across her face. This was her greatest achievement in her entire research career. The potion she held was her salvation from impending death and a path to victory. She proudly declared that in terms of intelligence, few could surpass her at this moment. But before she could fully relish her triumph, Rual delivered a blow as startling as thunder. This was just the first vial. She had to quickly move on to experiment with the second vial on herself. He had promised her life, but only in the sense of prolonging it a bit longer. He vowed to diligently record this experiment and hoped Benek would fully embrace it. Benek continuously pleaded for forgiveness and promised to do whatever he wanted, just to be spared. However, Rual was indifferent, knowing that no amount of apologies could be heard by the dead. Vial after vial was forcibly poured into her mouth, each taking effect. The unbearable itching and red welts nearly broke her, but she still managed to concoct the antidote. This process repeated 40 times, yet Rual showed no signs of stopping. He watched her collapse on the ground, voiceless, but his thirst for vengeance was still unquenched. He tried to pour the 41st vial into her mouth, but it seemed to be her absolute limit. Looking at Benek's rigid body on the floor, Rual calmly recorded the time and date of her departure from this world. It was a fitting and perfect end for a mad, barbaric scientist. He joyfully noted in his records that it was an accidental death and quickly subdued the two monsters behind him. Leaving the place, Rual realized that the earlier rain had ceased, as if the heavens had sanctioned his actions. The scent of the earth after the rain was refreshingly pleasant, lifting Rual's spirits more than usual. His next destination was the village where devils masquerading as innocents resided. They would pay with their lives for denying water to the transformed soldiers. Rual was determined that they would die dismembered, with no one to save them, and he would show no mercy. He walked alone through the dark forest, unafraid, with only a small lantern in hand, heading towards the village. In the village, innocent children playing outside were called back home by their mothers as dusk fell. One house was home to a mother and her two children, as their father was guarding the village entrance. Suddenly, two pitifully beautiful sisters arrived, seeking help from the father. Claiming they were lost, they aroused no suspicion in him. In fact, he warmly opened the village gates to welcome them, offering them to stay as long as they liked, as many traders had been welcomed in this border village. After finishing his shift early, he brought the sisters home for dinner. The elder sister explained that their father was gravely ill, and they had gone to the capital to sell goods to afford his medicine, quickly gaining the couple's sympathy. The younger sister was introduced as shy and reticent, always silent and observant. The couple comforted the young girl, encouraging her to feel at home as they also had children of a similar age. The husband, worried about the presence of monsters in the area, suggested the girls stay the night for safety. He assured them that as long as they were in the village, they were safe under the protection of a skilled knight. The girls readily agreed and then presented a bottle of perfume made from flowers in their garden as a gift, delighting the couple. The village chief was sitting silently near the gate, taking over the guard duty for the night since there were guests. He sat there, hoping for a significant event the next day. While it sounded mysterious, everyone was confident this event would bring great joy to the village. During the night, as the sisters slept soundly, the younger one suddenly screamed and opened her eyes wide. What followed was a swift and brutal massacre of the villagers, orchestrated to rob and kill. It turns out that this was the modus operandi of the village, exploiting everything they could from wayfarers seeking shelter. The two children had been heartlessly stripped of their hair and then buried in the cold ground. The next morning, the villagers resumed their normal activities, switching shifts and waiting at the gate for their next victim. The children of the village, oblivious to the dark happenings, continued to play innocently. Not long after the shift change, the gatekeeper heard a knock and curiously peered through the peephole. To his shock, he saw the face of the younger sister, now wearing a terrifying smile. Stammering, he questioned how she could possibly be back. Before he could react, the girl revealed herself as Rual, who blasted the gate open to expose the village's sins. Introducing himself as the resurrected hero long spoken of, he had returned to avenge the innocent lives lost and make the villagers pay for their deeds. Rual's appearance in the village surprised everyone, from the elders to the children, stirring unease in their hearts. The most common question was why the former hero had come to such a remote, insignificant place. The village chief, an elderly man, approached Rual with a pitiful smile, inquiring about the hero's unexpected visit. He argued that their small, isolated village had no reason to attract such a distinguished guest. But if the chief had forgotten their past actions, Rual was there to remind him. He recounted how, years ago, bizarre monsters had passed through the village, begging for water, but were denied even a single drop. The chief maintained a benign smile, insisting that their peaceful village could never engage in such acts. However, Rual was determined to uncover the truth before laying waste to the village, a mass grave of dismembered bodies. He vowed that if even one person remained, he would save them and not give up. The surviving older children, now huddled together in fear, realized their imminent demise but harbored deep resentment in their hearts. The monsters grabbed a young boy as if he were merely an ant, ignoring the desperate pleas of his older sister. They poked their fingers into the boy's eye sockets, callously removing his innocent, bright eyes. Seeing no further use for him, as he would be worthless to sell, the monsters decided to end the boy's life. The sister's heart-wrenching scream was haunting, bringing tears to the eyes of anyone who heard it. But in this moment of utter despair, Rual unexpectedly appeared to save them. He ordered the monster to put the boy down, but before it could even refuse a second time, Rual had already cleaved the creature in two. The other monsters, terrified at witnessing the demise of their kind, attempted to flee but were swiftly eradicated by Rual. Rual gently lifted the boy onto his lap and called for a healer to attend to him. Despite their efforts, the boy could no longer see the sunlight, as his eyeballs had been crushed. Rual had arrived too late to save the innocent victims. The boy's older brother held him tightly, sobbing in agony at the sight of the current situation. He refused to listen to anything Rual said, resentful that Rual's late arrival and his immense power couldn't protect them. If only the boy had a fraction of Rual's strength, the village's fate might have been different. Rual understood this pain, empathizing with the loss of family and loved ones. He decided to give the boy his constant companion, a dagger. He encouraged the boy to use it as motivation to protect those around him as he grew up. The boy would eventually become one of the finest soldiers in the royal army. But during a poison experiment, he remained unaware, focused only on repaying Rual for saving his life. This was the reason for Rual's profound anger and frustration. The children were each given a vial of poison, standing ready to drink it together on command. The orchestrator had also mentioned that the poison would only be effective for a short period before losing its potency. The effects could be mitigated more quickly if water was drunk promptly, as those who consumed it would be extremely thirsty. Just seconds after ingesting the poison, the children felt an immense terror, as if they were in a living hell. They knew that just a bit of water from the Nor village near the edge of the forest could somewhat quench their thirst. Their current plight was a result of a scheme to transform these useless children into controllable and useful assets in battle. But it was also conveniently planned that by the time they reached Nor village, they would self-destruct. In agony, they dragged themselves to the village gates, begging for water, but the villagers were unmoved. Even a single cup of water was denied, leading to their gradual demise outside the village. The village chief eventually appeared to assess the situation but quickly realized something was amiss. The children's pleas that just one cup of water would return them to normal and their promise not to harm anyone revealed that these monsters were still human and capable of human thoughts. Smiling contentedly, the chief held up a water jug in front of these desperate creatures. This only intensified their frenzy, as obtaining the water required payment. To the chief, paying for what one desires was a simple fact of life. However, these were mere foot soldiers, and in their current state, they had no money on them. The village chief not only refused them water but also called the villagers to witness the creature's plight. The villagers spat out continuous insults and expressions of disgust at the creatures. The children, parched and in pain, pleaded with their last bit of strength, only to be met with cruel laughter. The villagers felt a perverse sense of superiority, reveling in the power of being begged by others. They were ungrateful, not realizing that these people had become this way in the process of saving them. In the end, the children exploded and perished right at the village gates, leaving no survivors. The villagers watched emotionlessly as the children met their tragic end. Rual reminded the villagers of these events, but they dismissed his words as mere fabrications of his own making. In response, Rual swiftly snatched a dagger from the hands of a young boy. It was the very dagger he had given to that child years ago, but now it was in the hands of a villager. This dagger served as undeniable proof of the villagers' heinous actions. Not only did they fail to help the children, but they also plundered all their belongings, leaving them with nothing. They were the ultimate exploiters, living on the fringes, surviving by robbing and killing refugees or those unfortunate enough not to make it back to their homeland. Rual knew of their deeds through a spell that allowed him to become a girl whose sister had been killed the day before. Although he did not intervene in their looting, as it was their way of life, he had a more pressing matter at hand. He was there to seek justice for his former comrades. The villagers below tried to justify their actions by claiming they were merely following the village chief's orders. But such excuses were futile if they lacked personal conviction. The village chief, furious and betrayed by his own people, was at a loss for words. But no one could escape their sins, and all would have to follow Rual to repay their debts. Uncontrollably, their legs moved in accordance with Rual's commands. He was leading them to a place of truth and light, where they would cleanse their sins in the presence of the Almighty. This journey was indeed a field trip to the realm of justice. The villagers were led on a long, relentless march, unable to control their own movements, following Rual like dogs to their master. He intended to lead them to the gates of Molka village, and upon reaching it, their journey would come to an end. Finally, they smiled, believing they had reached Molka, where they would be able to drink water. But upon crossing the village threshold, they were shocked to find themselves in Nor village instead. Their thirst was real, their exhaustion was real, but why had they ended up here? Rual, comfortably seated on his horse and not weary in the least, still wore a bright smile. Rual felt no remorse for their deserved fate. Having walked for a while, he decided to take a break to rest himself. He took out a bottle of water and drank heartily, ignoring the desperate, thirsty gazes of the people around him. The village chief, in a fit of anger, begged for just a cup of water, but was met only with Rual's scorn. Rual remembered hearing a similar plea before, but the outcome was no different now. After finishing his drink, he carelessly threw the bottle on the ground, indifferent to their thirst. The village chief, in a pathetic state, crawled to the bottle to lick the last drops of water, completely disregarding his dignity. Their final destination was the Molka mining village adjacent to Nor. However, in this amusing journey, Rual would magically make them return to their starting point whenever they saw their destination. The landscape he created was merely an illusion, making them walk in circles around their own village. This was a field trip designed for them to experience extreme pain and thirst. But they still did not beg for the children's forgiveness. They accused Rual of being inhumane for not sparing the children, but weren't those children innocent too? Who, then, is the real inhumane one here, indifferent to the fact that those suffering were just children? These people had watched the children die of thirst, and now they were pleading for their own children. Rual advised them to endure silently, as this was the justice they deserved. All who had killed those children would lose their own children as a way to atone for their sins. They watched their children develop rashes and dissolve into water, only to hear their children's reproaches about why they didn't save the other kids. This was their karmic retribution for the atrocities they had committed, but they seemed unable to accept this reality. Before they could even finish grieving, Rual continued leading them on his experiment. What he had created for the children was an illusion, and they were safe in the village. He also created the illusion that the adults were busy, allowing the children to play freely. Rual knew right from wrong and did not drag innocent children into this, making them suffer for the adults' deeds. From now on, the villagers would endure a hell on earth, experiencing the fiery torment of a desert with scorching sun and burning sands. This space, created from an illusion, was indistinguishable from a real desert. The blistering sun and the heat of the sand seared their skin, eliciting cries of agony as their flesh burned. After enduring this for a while, they finally reached a level of thirst similar to that of the children. Thus, this experimental journey came to an appropriate end. The villagers were congratulated for completing the journey as they arrived at the gates of Moked village. They smiled in relief, believing they had finally found their salvation. However, they were unaware that their next plea would be for death, the only escape from their suffering. The guards of Moked village, seeing the approaching adults, quickly summoned their soldiers and closed the gates, fearing for the safety of their village. Seeing the gates shut, the village chief of Nor erupted in anger. He proclaimed himself as the chief of Nor and demanded the gates be opened to welcome him. From Moked villagers' perspective, these people were attacking their gates, and they had to defend their village. They wondered why the villagers from Nor looked so crazed and diseased, their skin charred and festering. The Nor village chief urgently pleaded for the gates to be opened, claiming it was the humane thing to do. The people of Moked were confused about what was happening below and why they were so desperately thirsty. However, Rual wasn't going to let them be easily rescued, so he manipulated the situation. He broadcasted the inner voice of the Nor village chief, claiming that they must be saved quickly. Otherwise, the people of Moked would suffer the same fate as the merchants and travelers who had passed through Nor, implying that they would be killed and looted. Hearing this, the guards immediately halted any attempts to rescue them. The village chief of Nor frantically tried to correct Rual's statements, fearing being truly abandoned if the people believed Rual's words. He claimed he was unexpectedly attacked by Rual and inexplicably controlled to come here. To the Moked villagers, the people below seemed incredibly suspicious and not at all coherent. One Moked villager noticed a ribbon on a Nor villager's hand, which belonged to his daughter who had gone missing weeks ago. He had made that ribbon himself for his daughter, and there couldn't possibly be another like it in the world. Could it be that the Nor villagers were responsible for the disappearances? At the gate, the Nor villagers were trying to force it open violently. This caused panic among the Moked guards, further convincing them that these people were attempting to invade their village. The only thing they could do was to throw stones down to prevent the Nor villagers from entering. The Nor villagers couldn't escape the rain of rocks as they were immobilized on the spot. Watching them die like this brought immense pleasure to Rual. His desire was fulfilled without him having to lift a finger. The sight of the village chief desperately craving water from a bottle Rual carelessly threw away filled him with delight. The chief begged pitifully for just a sip of water, but life is not always as one wishes. Rual taunted the chief, lying on the ground in agony from thirst, feeling internally triumphant. Watching their miserable state alleviated some of his guilt and regret for his young comrades. But he would only give them water if they could pay for it, using their own previous words against them, fueling the villagers' hatred. This was the price they had to pay for their crimes. As dusk fell and the village children, unaware of the adults' fate, continued to play, they began to wonder about their absence. Assuming the adults were just busy with work, they carried on with their games. Rual returned to the village, ready to start his next plan with the children. These children, because of their parents' crimes, would all have to become soldiers and laborers. Hearing Rual's words, they were shocked and confused about what was happening. But the eldest among them declared that they would never have to be soldiers because the villagers here were used to waiting for the golden cows to arrive, killing and looting them. It turned out that the children had also been gradually trained, so such actions were normal for them. Seeing this, Rual didn't hold back any longer and began his punishment. He used magic to retrieve a pendant from the eldest, which surely belonged to someone else. Since their parents were now unable to return after facing a terrible fate, the children were forced to obey Rual. But this caused the children to erupt in anger, wanting to rush and take back their toy. It was clear they were offspring of a lineage accustomed to robbery and murder. Seeing this, Rual decided to turn them into real soldiers who would be useful for the country at this time. As soon as he finished speaking, the children were mesmerized and taken away, each of them no longer coherent but continuously demanding to become soldiers immediately. If they were so passionate, Rual would help them realize this reality. He took them to a camp near Nor village and left them with the guard soldiers, instilling in them the idea that they must sacrifice their lives to save innocent civilians. As for the princess, she became the main actress in Rual's special play. Not only her, but the former royal commander also had the honor of participating in this play. Both were tied up without a shred of clothing in a dark cell with no way out. They would have to suffer the appropriate punishment for what they had created. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Kurz, the princess was going mad, unable to find any trace of Sandra. Despite turning the kingdom upside down, the results were still nil. Sandra had mysteriously disappeared from the prison, leaving behind the terrifying death of the jailer. The people were terrified because they couldn't find Sandra as ordered by the princess. But if one were to seriously consider it, everyone understood that Rual was behind this. The princess was slightly afraid and lost control of herself when she remembered Rual's words that he would return when she regained her beauty. But this did not deter the princess from wanting to find Sandra at any cost, no matter how much longer it took. We need to rewind a few hours to when Sandra was still tied up in the torture room, fearfully mumbling about needing to kill the hero. However, this was not yet what Rual wanted to see, so he decided to play a trick. He used magic to transform himself into the princess and approached Sandra, helping her sit up. Surprisingly, when Sandra saw the princess, she saw her as a savior and shamelessly crawled over to her. In pain and tears, she begged for another chance to prove her loyalty and repay the princess. This amused Rual greatly, as Sandra was genuinely willing to do anything in the world for her master. Given another opportunity, Sandra couldn't contain her happiness. She reminisced about the time before she became the princess's personal knight, how she had ruthlessly eliminated her troublesome brothers. She did all this to show her determination to the princess and to be recognized. She was given a sword and thus began her journey of massacre, lured by promises. The guard soldiers saw her approaching but were unprepared. Only when they saw two severed heads in Sandra's hands did they realize the gravity of the situation. But by then, Sandra was beyond reasoning and just swung her sword, continuously taking their lives. The princess was just behind a door, now in a critical situation as Sandra, under Rual's spell, was heading straight for the princess's room without a second thought, driven only by a desire for carnage. Meanwhile, the princess, sitting on her golden throne sipping tea, was internally burning with anxiety, unaware of Sandra's whereabouts. Her loyal servant came to soothe her anger with a newly invented torture weapon. Though she wanted Sandra executed immediately, she was intrigued by his words and somewhat calmed down. She decided to have Sandra tortured with that machine as soon as she was captured. Suddenly, there was a loud, startling noise outside the door, causing the princess to choke in shock. Angered and confused about what was happening, the princess saw the door open. Sandra entered the room clad in blood-stained armor, wielding a gleaming sword that had just claimed the lives of an entire army outside. She brought as a gift the heads of the king's advisors, which she had obtained through her strenuous efforts. She saw this as an order from the princess and executed it with everything she had. It turned out that Rual had manipulated her into doing this, and ultimately, it was successful. He implanted in her the belief that the king's advisors were disobedient and defied orders. They claimed the princess lacked the necessary qualities to inherit the throne and even dared to say she was useless for not being able to bear a child. Because of this, the princess supposedly ordered Sandra to behead all those men immediately. Sandra, obeying every word of the princess without resistance or thought, systematically took the lives of the king's close associates. The princess's servants, hearing this, were terrified, fearing they might suffer the same fate in the future. The princess vehemently denied these allegations, but everyone in the hall knew that Sandra was her most trusted servant. Sandra's words couldn't be false, as she was known to be honest. The situation now was that the ministers were dead, and Victoria's day to rule was approaching. Sandra's revelation made Victoria freeze in shock, enduring the suspicious glances of everyone in the hall. They demanded an explanation for what they had just heard, but Sandra kept speaking incessantly. She firmly believed she was only following the princess's orders, not daring to disobey what she had been instructed in the dark dungeon. Unable to bear it anymore, the princess stood up with a sword to strike Sandra. However, not only did Sandra remain unharmed, but the princess also fell backward, all thanks to Rual's magic. In anger, the princess cursed Sandra as worthless and just a maggot who would be voiceless without her help. Victoria then decreed to strip Sandra of her knightly title and throw her into the dungeon. From the beginning, Victoria had only seen Sandra as a replaceable plaything, never requiring much thought. For Sandra, these revelations were like a thunderbolt, having lived her entire life for the princess and done everything for her. Now stripped of her title, Sandra was nothing more than an incompetent person with nothing left. The princess ordered Sandra to be locked in the dark dungeon, awaiting Rual's judgment. She had planned to eliminate the ministers too, but not at this moment. The recent events only further diminished Victoria's status and position. All these events were orchestrated by the hero, so now Victoria had to do something to salvage everything. She decided to take charge and quell the chaos, using the excuse that Rual had killed all the kingdom's heroes. By doing so, Victoria herself would ascend to the throne, not needing any heir, thanks to her actions. Victoria decided to keep a nun by her side to avoid Rual's magic spells. People who had fallen into darkness were afraid of nuns, which amused her greatly. Once again, she planned to push Rual into a corner and witness the hero's agony. If she was mentally prepared, her servant would go and prepare the newly invented torture device. The next act was expected to be extremely dramatic and capture the nation's attention. As expected, Sandra was stripped of her knightly title and now knelt on the platform in the public square. People from all over the country flocked to witness this spectacle. No one felt pity for her, instead, they were curiously excited. Sandra had been locked in a dungeon for 3 days without food or water before being brought here today. People blamed her for the hero's erratic behavior, which had led to Victoria's tarnished reputation and significantly diminished status. The princess blamed Sandra for burning the village, which angered the hero. Therefore, all the suffering Victoria had to endure was in Sandra's stead. The princess gave the public the power to decide Sandra's fate, showing no regard for Sandra's pleas. Victoria kicked Sandra painfully when accused of being the one who ordered the burning of the village. This was the moment when the people's repressed anger reached its peak. Rual had succeeded in dealing with Sandra, and now he just needed to sit back and watch everything unfold as planned. The people urged the princess to quickly pronounce a sentence so they could execute Sandra immediately. The princess, pleased with achieving her goal, now just waited for the hero to arrive. Her fiancé, horrified by his future bride's true face, ran into his mother's arms, crying. A mob of monsters roared in protest, demanding Sandra be sent to hell to atone for her sins. The princess commanded these people to commit atrocities without considering the retribution she would soon face. She labeled Sandra as an ally of evil and a disgrace to the royal knight army. Sandra had outlived her usefulness to the princess and now had to pay for her deeds. The crowd unanimously called for Sandra's execution, which was about to happen. However, Sandra couldn't die due to the hero's magic, so Victoria decided to throw Sandra down to the crowd, letting them decide her fate. Lustful men rushed towards her like beasts, tearing off the remaining pieces of cloth on Sandra to fulfill their depraved acts. The princess delightedly watched this scene, shouting for everyone to carve into Sandra's skin with knives, making her understand the pain. This was the punishment for anyone daring to defy the princess. But before it could begin, the hero appeared right above the princess. Victoria found these torture methods boring, as she had used them on Rual before, and wondered why not try something different this time. Finally, Rual appeared as Victoria wished, and the real game was about to start. In reality, the princess was the evil one, but from the people's perspective, they were the real demons. A horde of demons in human disguise stood there, led by Victoria. Rual happily reminded everyone of the events that had occurred and how he had been the one suffering at the hands of the mob. But let's not forget how the princess had been tortured the day before for her sins. Worry and fear were evident on the faces of the crowd, clueless about what would happen next. Rual joyfully introduced the play he had directed, featuring indispensable actors. Firstly, we cannot forget Saint Christiana, followed by the great mage Wendell. Next is the former royal knight Sandra, and finally, the main actress, Princess Victoria. The princess was eager to assign a role in the play to Rual, suggesting he take the lead while she would play a supporting role. But the princess should not be hasty, as the play hadn't started yet. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the moment when the blatant weakness of the ruling class would be exposed. The princess and Sandra weren't the only ones who betrayed the hero's cause, there was also the mage Wendell. While Rual was bound in a dungeon and enduring Victoria's whip, he was also tortured mentally. The princess wanted to decorate with the fetus of his sister and bring it before him as decor. Rual swore to tear apart anyone who dared to trample over the bodies of his loved ones, but the princess showed no fear. At that moment, Wendell came to Rual, saying that if he sacrificed his body and soul to the princess, everything would be resolved. Wendell and Christiana were captured by the princess and would be spared if Wendell could convince Rual to make the sacrifice. Rual agreed to anything as long as his loved ones would survive. But as soon as Rual nodded, Wendell revealed a satisfied smile, as it was all a joke. From the beginning, Rual had no one by his side, and Wendell never considered him a teammate. Rual became a joke to all the people he loved and trusted most. This betrayal was too much for Rual to accept. Now, to Wendell, Rual was no longer the strongest hero in the world but the stupidest. This revelation shocked the public, who didn't know whom to believe anymore. But it seemed Wendell had prepared for this situation and used his venomous tongue to spew nonsense. With his handsome face, he won the hearts of the people and made them believe his words. But this was not the end of the play. Next, we would see what Christiana had done in the past, and Rual would expose this truth for the public to witness. Christiana was brought here by Rual, a real person in a real situation. However, her first statement was a firm denial of betraying Rual. Yet, these words seemed like mere child's talk to Rual, who paid no heed to them. It was Christiana who orchestrated everything behind the scenes, manipulating the actions of the princess. Moreover, it wasn't even her working hours, so there was no need for her to act so innocently charming. At that moment, Christiana revealed her true, lustful nature as she looked at Rual with covetous eyes. Perhaps he saw through Christiana's past, but to her, that perception was perversely endearing. The saintly lady had used her power to bewitch the princess with her twisted tales of love. She aimed to claim Rual for herself, and when her plans failed, she descended into madness. Although initially rejected by the princess, the saintly lady, with her seductive voice, ultimately achieved her goal. Sandra sensed the trouble and tried to pull the saintly lady away, but she persisted in her delusions. She kept insisting that the princess and Raoul were meant for each other. If Rual refused, the saintly lady had ways to make him return to the princess. These smooth words suggested that all the princess's actions were orchestrated by the saintly lady. Now, with the current situation, the hero was gaining popularity and gradually taking the princess's place. But killing him would drive the public into a frenzy, so the princess had to turn her enemy into a friend. She decided to call the hero and gradually figure out how to bind Rual so that he couldn't leave her side. The saintly lady advised the princess to strip Rual of his hero status and turn him into her own pet. Rual wouldn't be able to live without the princess, and she would naturally become the most powerful in the kingdom. The thought of Rual chained at her feet delighted both the perverted princess and the saintly lady, like bliss above the clouds. Victoria couldn't help but be overwhelmed by her own imagination upon hearing this. The princess decided to fully succumb to the saintly lady's seduction, disregarding right and wrong. She instructed Sandra to quickly find out about everyone related to Rual and bring them to her. She was determined to possess Rual at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing anything. For it was this very affair that marked the beginning of Rual's misfortune, as well as that of the innocent people. These words, exposed before the public, sent the princess into a panic, and she screamed loudly, attempting to drown out Rual's words. Rual thought the princess was just afraid of the truth, but it turned out she wanted to twist reality, claiming those things were false fabrications. The princess rejoiced, having a nun by her side, which was the weak point of dark magic. Rual, finally amused, noticed that the princess was now fighting back instead of passively enduring the situation. For the princess, understanding Rual's nature was just a matter of spending some time, so it wasn't challenging at all. What could instantly paralyze Rual was the holy magic, the purifying power only wielded by nuns. The princess was proud to have discovered this while Rual was still running around engaging in futile actions. Now, the princess would step forward, taking responsibility for rescuing the kingdom and helping the people to move freely again. Rual found the princess's smug expression amusingly ironic. The princess commanded the holy woman to quickly bring Rual back to forgetfulness once more. This time, she would watch him decay and ensure Rual could never return. But before the plan could start, Christiana bluntly refused the princess, not wanting to be labeled a traitor. This made the princess plummet from cloud 9 to a deep abyss. Victoria's smile froze, and she stood there, petrified. It turned out that all this was because the king had spoken to the holy woman. Originally, he wanted to keep the princess as she was just a regular daughter, but now, things had changed. She was so unrestrained that she hunted and harmed the king's close servants, so the idea of disowning the princess wasn't surprising. The princess couldn't believe these words from the holy woman and didn't know how to react. She shook her head in denial, unable to accept the truth. But if she wouldn't believe, Rual decided to enlighten her. Her father had given the holy woman an item to prove his intention to remove his daughter from the kingdom. The holy woman eagerly searched for this item to show the princess and validate her words. A letter with the royal seal, only found in the king's room, was placed in the princess's hands. She couldn't believe this was true, and now everything was revealed, leaving Victoria with no power to wreak havoc anymore. This revelation also left the subjects below in shock, as the princess had always been dearly pampered by the king. The contents of the letter overwhelmed Victoria with emotion. Her unattractive face upon realizing that she would have to use her life to appease the hero's wrath was evident. The king warned her not to die a useless woman. Therefore, he would grant her a meaningful death as atonement to the hero, and moreover, she should thank the king for such a decision. Enraged, the princess ordered the knights to quickly capture the hero and the holy woman. But no one moved, still pondering whether to believe the king's words. The princess claimed it was all a fabrication, but with that seal, no one could help her anymore. Her clear uselessness left Victoria embarrassed before her subjects, holding her head in despair. Now, she seemed like a madwoman, a spectacle for the onlookers. She ran to grab Rual's neck, laughing loudly, believing her father couldn't possibly do this. She was the king's only child, without her, his lineage would end. She had truly done everything, no matter how reckless, to ascend to that position. All her actions, whether noble or vile, were ultimately to ascend the throne. She dreamed of becoming the first queen of the kingdom, where no one would dare oppose or argue with her. Rual, without a hint of pity, pushed her to the floor, turning the scene into an ugly spectacle. She sat growling on the ground like a rabid dog. Despite this, she didn't forget her vow to tear Rual into 100 pieces. Rual was curious how she would do that, knowing that soon she would have to use her life to soothe his spirit. The king would hear from Rual right away, and by then, Victoria would be nothing but a name. While Victoria clung to the reason that she was the only child, the truth was finally laid bare. The king actually had 3 more princesses, so losing Victoria meant nothing to him. To him, protecting the absolute safety of his royal reputation was the utmost priority. Even sacrificing a useless daughter was a small price to pay. Without further ado, Rual decided to end this interesting play here and bring down a terrifying punishment. Rual's direct words struck Victoria like lightning, bringing her back to reality, leaving her with no hope at all. The king had long known of Victoria's schemes and had been spreading his seed throughout the kingdom. She was never considered by him when it came to passing on his authority. The princess found herself in this predicament with no one to save her. This was indeed a unique and strange tale in the kingdom of Kurz, a one-of-a-kind fate for a princess. She was always praised as the kingdom's treasure, not only beautiful but also gentle and graceful. But now, was she ever truly loved as she portrayed herself to be? Rual was curious how the princess felt being betrayed by those she trusted the most. When all her relatives turned their backs, even pushing her to death for their own benefits. All that she had enjoyed until now was nothing but illusions she had created for herself. The people below were surprised to see her true face. They had obeyed and praised her only because Victoria was the king's daughter. From the beginning, they saw her as nothing good and utterly despicable. The princess sat among the subjects, hearing their terrifying condemnations directly. She couldn't understand and never expected to be turned against like this. But after everything, there was still one person who spoke up wanting to save her, Sandra. She was truly mad, obsessed with her love for the princess, using her last strength to crawl onto the stage. The princess, terrified, wanted to back away, but she couldn't order the knights to capture Sandra anymore. They despised the princess because of her they had committed many contemptible acts and faced punishment. Sandra dragged herself onto the stage, not forgetting to carry a large sword, wishing to join the princess in eternal oblivion. Sandra decided to liberate the princess, ignoring Victoria's desperate pleas. A sword thrust into Victoria's abdomen caused her to cough up blood, but she was still alive, gasping for air. If the princess didn't die, Sandra would use a dagger to end her own life first. She would go to heaven first to wait for the princess, finally fulfilling her wish to be with her. Rual found this scene immensely entertaining. Who could have guessed things would turn out so dramatically? Killing two birds with one stone, he now moved to punish those present. They were nothing but demons in human guise, beyond any further consideration. Rual joyfully sang that he wouldn't let Victoria die so easily. He planned to find a place where everyone could see and hang her there. The villagers would witness this openly and clearly. He took the princess to the top of a mountain with a giant wooden cross. This masterpiece would be named The Princess Crucified Under the Moonlight. He wouldn't let her die easily, she must slowly feel the excruciating pain. Rual realized he had adopted a romanticism he wasn't aware of before, but that wasn't a bad thing. He decided to summon a pack of large wolves, along with maggots or even crows and hawks. He would let Victoria experience the ultimate pain as she was literally devoured. Wolves would tear her apart from below, leaving the upper parts for rats and wriggling insects. Her eyes would be taken by crows and hawks, but she wouldn't die, enduring that pain while still alive. He also thought of bringing the general here to suffer, but hadn't had the chance yet. Around him lay body parts large and small of those he had slain. They deserved this punishment, a retribution for their deeds. But still, his collection had many empty spaces for faces yet to appear. Next, Rual planned to visit the demon slave camp of the Kingdom of Curs. Children brought there were brainwashed and turned into decorative objects. The possessions of the captives were stripped away, and the process of categorizing the merchandise for different price ranges began. Wendell left in disgust, showing no fear when mentioning Rual. He believed that being Rual's close friend meant he could do anything without Rual harming him. He departed, leaving the unfortunate children behind, uncaring of the consequences, as long as his pockets were filled with money. Meanwhile, in a large arena in Curs, a terrifying spectacle was unfolding. Gladiators fought and slaughtered each other, and the person leisurely enjoying this scene from the throne was Rual. Despite the bloodshed, it seemed he was still not fully satisfied, indicating his lack of contentment. This marked the beginning of a rebellion of the demon slaves, a true and terrifying war against the Kingdom of Curs. At the Curs castle, a bizarre event is unfolding. Rual strides confidently into the king's chamber, invited by the monarch himself. His entrance is met with a respect from the guards that starkly contrasts their previous demeanor when the princess was in power. The king has gone to great lengths to orchestrate a blood-drenched spectacle for Rual's amusement. However, such displays are not enough for Rual. He takes it upon himself to teach them the true meaning of massacre. The performance features soldiers who, alongside General Brown, had ravaged villages. Whether directly or indirectly responsible, all are destined for execution. Yet, for the king, there is no pride in this, as Rual represents cold-blooded brutality. Meanwhile, at the border, a self-proclaimed hero is on a demon-hunting quest. Lately, Rual has been indulging in leisure at the capital, making such news rather surprising. However, this doesn't mean Rual is unaware of these developments, he simply doesn't see anything wrong with them. At this moment, the bald minister Alcott enters, suggesting that reaching a conclusion now seems premature. The royal family is yet to determine whether the impersonator is mimicking Rual to intimidate the populace or if it is indeed Rual himself. But before he finishes, a rope suddenly loops around his neck, causing him to stagger and fall. The king not only scolds him but also bows an apology to Rual for the prime minister's rash words. These impersonation incidents may be linked to Wendell, currently running a small workshop. He is at the seaport with a woman named Cameron, who owns a large transportation business. The king wants to eliminate them but needs someone to assist in the task. Rual warns the king not to overstep, as they are also his next targets. After speaking his piece, Rual swiftly departs to pursue his personal vendetta without delay. The border port city of Tord, within Ker's territory and formerly under demonic rule, is facing a grim reality. Emaciated and frail children, imprisoned in dark dungeons, are dragged out. Their cries of agony only seem to delight a wicked woman nearby, eager to taste their tears. Beside her stands the cruel jailer, relentlessly whipping the weeping children. But these demon children are so undervalued that they're treated carelessly, even to the point of death without any concern. At this moment, the Rual imposter intervenes to stop this and demands the woman to take him to Wendell. It's unbelievable that a hero and a great wizard would engage in such despicable acts. However, the fake Rual declares that he's experienced a good life but hasn't been treated properly, hence his decision to stop being good. On the way to Wendell's room, the imposter excuses himself to use the restroom, then dashes in and vomits profusely. Suddenly, a voice resounds. It's none other than the real Rual greeting them. The imposter, pale-faced, is baffled by what's happening. Terrified upon encountering the real Rual, he knows his deception is about to be exposed. Rual objectively comments that the impersonation was quite convincing, but the imposter needs more practice on his signature phrase of cursing the world. He might mimic the appearance, but his power is less than 1% of Rual's. Realizing his plight, the imposter continuously bows, insisting he did it all just for money. He admits to collaborating with Wendell and Allingham for mere survival. He threatens them into partnership, desperately bowing and saying he would do anything Rual wants, just to be spared. His fear is so pronounced that he even promptly kneels to lick Rual's shoes, praising their taste. Rual, laughing painfully, assures him that he won't kill him, as he is not a serial killer. But the imposter's purpose wasn't just money, he also sought revenge. Despite his excuses, Rual sees right through his thoughts. Yet, Rual offers to help him with his revenge. Rual takes him to a fantastical region to enjoy some exquisite black tea. Once seated, Rual boldly calls out the name Ada Taylor. This girl was noticed because there aren't many in the kingdom with the power of disguise. But isn't that list supposed to be unseen by ordinary people? Rual reveals that he is a friend of the king, causing Taylor to internally criticize the king for his secrecy. However, Rual understands that Taylor is involved in this only to expose the small demon trafficking operation of the two culprits. She's collaborating with them on one hand while plotting to bring their deeds to light on the other. It's madness for Taylor to cooperate with those who murdered her family, aiming to use them for her revenge. She wants to use Rual's identity to add fuel to the fire, hoping he will exact a more brutal revenge. Rual successfully ignites Taylor's desire for vengeance. She will live with this fire and make revenge her life's guiding principle from now on. Her nightmare won't end until she personally kills those two. Taylor's family used to live a warm and happy life together. Her father, Charles Taylor, worked as an accountant for Allingham for a long time. However, he grew suspicious when the gold increased suddenly after the defeat of the Demon King. His suspicions led him to a shocking crime one evening. He smelled a strong, foul odor coming from the basement. Driven by curiosity, he ventured deeper and stopped at a luxurious room where Allingham and Wendell were discussing the lucrative trade of demon slaves, boasting about capturing over 100 of them. The little demons were trapped in the basement, waiting for Allingham's illegal transactions. Unable to endure this atrocity, he decided to save the children there. Waiting for Allingham to leave, he sneaked into the room and witnessed the children lying in pools of blood. Although not dead, they were unconscious and severely wounded. He quickly took them to a doctor, hoping for a miracle, but only one survived. Deciding to take the child home as the doctor didn't want to get involved, he discussed with his wife about reporting the matter to the royal family. He was prepared to be arrested for his unintended involvement in the crime if it meant saving the children. His wife was pained to see him like this, but there was no other way. The gold kept increasing, unbeknownst to him, indicating that this immoral act had been ongoing for a long time. He asked his wife to inform his workplace the next day that he was sick, buying him some time. Then, she should quickly flee with their child and wait until the culprits were apprehended. At that time, Taylor was just a child, joyfully greeting her father who had just returned home. He kissed her forehead as a goodbye, as he had urgent matters to attend to outside. He promised to return soon after she had a good night's sleep, saying he would be there when she woke up. But Taylor didn't know that this was the last time she would see her father before he rode off towards the royal palace. He had to reach the palace quickly before they discovered one child was missing, but life isn't always as one hopes. Allingham's henchmen intercepted him, tied him to a horse, and dragged him away. The next morning, Taylor was awakened by her mother's screams, only to find a box containing what was once her father. The words written on the box are still etched in her memory: traitors will be executed. All her memories of her father were overshadowed by that day. Rual clapped his hands in excitement, thrilled by her story. So, now is the time for them to take revenge on those two, right? Taylor was angry at Rual's enthusiasm for revenge, but it was more of a satisfaction for him. Useless people often say that revenge is pointless, but that's just because they do it foolishly. True revenge doesn't bring anything tangible, but it gives an immense feeling of pleasure in one's chest. Taylor didn't want to accept that she had been tainted to such an extent, but Rual didn't force her. She just needed to gradually feel the darkness within herself. Although Rual wanted revenge on the two, it wasn't necessarily true that Wendell harbored hatred towards Rual. For that reason, Rual wanted to use Taylor as a pretext to punish Wendell. Taylor saw Rual's outstretched hand and didn't know why things had come to this. But her ultimate goal was to avenge her family, so she didn't need to care much about the process. She nodded, extended her hand towards Rual, and they officially became allies. She was only concerned about how to carry out her revenge now. Taylor, lacking any power beyond shape-shifting, found confronting Wendell a daunting task. Allingham had no power, but Wendell was rumored to be an unbeatable wizard. Rual, who had teamed up with him to defeat the Demon King, felt it was a pity that the Demon King was defeated by someone like him. However, Wendell had a weak spirit, so it was possible to manipulate him using tricks that even Taylor could perform. As Rual finished speaking, he stabbed Taylor with a knife, but instead of harming her, Taylor's consciousness entered Rual's body. Initially panicked, she soon regained her composure. Trusting that she would know how to use his body, Rual advised her to make the most of the strength he lent her. They quickly headed to the hall after discussing their strategy in detail. Together, they planned to bring these twisted human traffickers into the light for punishment. Taylor was ready to sacrifice everything to achieve her goal of avenging her family. In the hall, enormous jailers were overseeing the unloading of children as cargo, mercilessly beating the exhausted kids. Taylor stood outside the door, hesitant to act as she was unsure of what to do. Urging her to act quickly, Rual reminded her that the children would die if she continued to hesitate. He suggested starting by killing the guards at the door, and he would guide her on what to do next. Although Taylor was reluctant, Rual convinced her that these men also contributed to the trafficking and were responsible for her father's death, making them her targets too. Taylor's eyes sparkled with determination, pleasing Rual immensely. He knew he had placed his trust in the right person, so he wanted this revenge to be executed stylishly. The guards, surprised to see the hero alone as heroes usually don't travel solo, were caught off guard. Before they could react with their usual banter, Rual magically decapitated them. The guards at the back, realizing they were being ambushed, rushed forward but were also easily crushed. The children, witnessing this, were confused about what was happening. The children were bewildered at the sight of Rual, and Taylor, in her first time doing this, was equally shocked and speechless. Rual had to reassure the children, declaring himself as their ally. He urged them to trust him with the situation here and to escape quickly to avoid recapture. He announced his plan to eliminate all the guards one by one, followed by Allingham and Wendell. However, at that moment, Taylor suddenly had a thought, wondering if she was really placing her trust in the right person. As the children were unchained and heard Rual's words, a fire of hatred ignited within them. They vociferously denounced the regime and supported Rual unconditionally, which immensely pleased him. He felt the rush of being a conqueror coursing through his veins at that moment. Unaware of Taylor's conflicting thoughts, which might be disadvantageous to him, the children resolved to accompany him to the main hall to witness his strength and revenge. Taylor was worried whether she had entrusted her fate to the wrong hands, questioning whether all of this was right or wrong. Rual then led everyone from room to room, methodically eliminating all the guards, not sparing a single one. Initially hesitant, Taylor had now become a ruthless killer, transitioning from fear to indulging in the power of justice. She didn't realize her eyes were ablaze with vengeance, and Rual saw his past self in her. He resolved to join her in reclaiming freedom for the demon race and restoring the dignity stripped away by human hands. Revenge always brought an indescribable feeling of intense satisfaction. Finally, they were on the brink of confronting Allingham and Wendell, with only one door standing between them. The truth was about to be laid bare, and the debt of blood demanded its payment in kind. Allingham, standing behind Wendell, watched Rual enter without showing any fear. Rual declared he had liberated the slaves, unwilling to see them treated as worthless toys any longer. He also revealed that he had eliminated the guards and that these two were next. Only then did Allingham's face turn pale as he realized the gravity of his situation. But Wendell suddenly burst into laughter, to Allingham's surprise. From the beginning, he knew the Rual beside him was an impostor, so there was nothing to fear. Allingham also quickly sighed in relief, wondering why they hadn't killed the impostor sooner. Wendell was indignant for keeping such a secret, giving Allingham quite a scare. When Wendell cast his spells, he was unexpectedly countered by the real Rual standing in front of him. Such magic was impossible for an impostor, but Wendell realized that the situation was more complex than it seemed. He retreated in fear, unable to comprehend how this could happen. Rual, without hesitation, stepped forward to greet everyone, introducing himself. He was the real Rual and the close friend of Wendell standing there. Rual was somewhat hurt that his good friend couldn't distinguish between the real and the fake him, feeling a sting of betrayal as he thought Wendell would have recognized him as the next target. Seizing this opportunity, Rual decided to tighten the bonds of their friendship and reminisce about old times. The story began long ago with a country boy who became a hero and met a trusty friend. That year, Rual, favored by General Brown, was bullied and lived miserably until Wendell appeared and helped him, leading to their friendship. Together, they led their generation and made a fortune from their adventures. As they grew up, they were tasked with subduing the Demon King, strengthening their bond. During a trip, Rual decided to visit his sister and rest for a few days. His sister cooked delicious meals for them and treated them equally well. As the day of departure approached, she pulled Wendell aside, expressing her gratitude for growing up alongside her brother. She worried about Rual suddenly losing his strength one day, despite his current power. Previously, Rual lived with hatred, but he changed significantly after meeting Wendell. She was thankful when Wendell promised to protect Rual with his life, but he still had to return. Wendell realized his feelings for Rual's sister, seeing everything she had done. The two set off, not towards the Demon King, but to the Goblin King's palace. Fighting together, but perhaps getting too deep into justice wasn't a good idea when a village was brutally slaughtered in the meantime. However, the villages they saved would forever remember the debt to the two heroes. Rual felt that his teammate was his one and only soulmate in this world. He was even willing to sacrifice his life for Wendell's safety. But being too kind leads to exploitation, and being useless leads to elimination. On the night before entering the Demon King's castle, the two friends sat together, reminiscing about the past. No matter what happened, Rual never doubted the person beside him. He happily talked about his sister Claire, who was about to give birth, and how he was going to have a big family. But Wendell hugged him, saying not to forget that they were a family too. Laughter filled the air, but no one knew what the next day would bring. That night, Wendell couldn't sleep and kept pacing back and forth, as if plotting something important. The next day, the battle with the Demon King was a success, but it also marked the end of their friendship. After subduing the Demon King, Rual separated from the group and headed straight to Macaulay Village. Time and again, Rual ignored letters from the princess, choosing to stay and play with the village children. But now, the children lay silent on the ground as Sandra's army came to take the hero away. Wendell watched this unfold without any emotion or guilt, just a half-smile on his face. He and Rual were taken away because the children were used as hostages. Sandra said it was because Rual ignored the princess's summons and possessed terrifying power. The incidents in the village might have been caused by Rual, so he and his team would be escorted back to the capital. Why would they take innocent children as hostages? Sandra claimed to have sealed Wendell's powers, so he couldn't do anything. Wendell offered himself as a hostage in Rual's place, so Rual could use his power to save the children. But Rual would never agree to such a plan. Wendell did this because he understood Rual's nature and was confident in his plan. Rual, despite not wanting to believe that Sandra could easily seal a wizard's power, felt helpless. He agreed to lay down his sword and surrender, as Sandra had said. At this point, Rual could only place his trust in the royal justice system. Unsure of what else to do, he loudly demanded to be taken to the royal palace to present the matter to the king. Everything Rual did had been manipulated, and they knew they would succeed in psychologically breaking him this way. But inexplicably, the sword he dropped ended up in a child's hand. Within a second, the child with the sword stabbed another child nearby. Sandra claimed these were actions orchestrated by Rual, even though he was unaware of what was happening. The injured child fell to the ground in pain, writhing in a pool of blood, helpless. Rual could only watch, unable to defend himself or save the child. The child then called out Rual's name in agony before ending his own life. Seeing the blood spill on the ground shocked Rual. He couldn't comprehend what was happening. Sandra laughed triumphantly, revealing her true nature, certain that the bloodshed would please the princess. Wendell watched as Rual was dragged away, screaming in apparent agony, but internally he was gloating. Rual, while being taken away, reassured Wendell not to be afraid, promising to try and rescue him. This made Wendell even more curious about Rual's true nature under distress. Many torments awaited Rual in the capital, unbeknownst to him. He was framed for massacring the villagers and had to helplessly witness his sister's murdered body in the church. Finally, he was imprisoned in the palace dungeon, drowning in the princess's unrequited love day after day. Victoria tortured him, wanting Rual to submit to her, but he never did. Rual's only concern was for Wendell and Christiana's safety, hoping they were well. But unknown to Rual, while he suffered miserably in the dungeon, Wendell was enjoying life in the palace. He lived like a king, served hand and foot without having to lift a finger. Eventually growing bored, Wendell decided to visit the dungeon to witness the defeated face of the once revered hero. Then, as one might expect, Rual reunited with his friend, his eyes sparkling, and he quickly agreed to Wendell's terms, making Wendell laugh out loud. Wendell felt pity for the hero who was deceived and unaware that he was being made a fool of. Therefore, to push Rual into the abyss, Wendell bluntly revealed that they were never really a team from the beginning. Wendell had only used Rual as a stepping stone for his own path to fame. Rual burst into tears at this betrayal, especially when Wendell brought up his sister Claire. During Rual's absence, trying to save others, unspeakable atrocities had occurred at the church. Claire had been violated by the priests, day after day, with Wendell's presence. Wendell thought of Claire as public property, no longer interesting to him, and just stopped by to hear her cries. To him, the sister of a hero was a mere curiosity. Claire, being treated as a worthless object, didn't even merit Wendell's attention anymore. Wendell spoke these words with no regard, driving Rual to madness. Don't dare insult my sister, Rual thought, and it was for this reason he had become what he was today. Claire was brutally killed while still pregnant. The princess had planned to wait until Claire gave birth to kill them both, but for some reason, she hastened their deaths. Taking away what a great hero cherished was the true way to inflict maximum pain. They were nothing but demons in human skin. Wendell's words made Raoul erupt with rage, but he was powerless. The handcuffs rendered all his magic useless, so no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't do anything. Understanding this, Wendell taunted Raoul mercilessly, indifferent to his wrath. Raoul was merely a stepping stone for Wendell's ambitions. Wealth, fame, and power would all be in Wendell's grasp, and he would stand at the pinnacle of glory. This was why Wendell had approached Raoul and helped him defeat the Demon King. Wendell's reputation spread far and wide, and that was all he needed. After the Demon King was defeated, the only danger left was Raoul himself. Fortunately, at that very moment, the princess issued an order, and Wendell seized this opportunity to act. That was all he needed, and out of brotherly respect, he decided to reveal his next plan. First and foremost, he wanted money. Even though he was living in the royal palace, he still desired more. The key player here was Mr. DaCosta, who had been invested in by Allingham. The slave trade of demons was extremely profitable, and it also allowed him to control wealthy merchants. Gradually, he removed obstacles in his path and began to gain power over the kingdom. He manipulated the princess to find weaknesses in each royal family member, who were nothing more than cheap pieces. The princess was nothing more than a lustful whore craving Raoul's body. For Wendell, being the princess's servant was just a small price to pay for his ambitions. Wendell was about to take over the region, so Raoul should obediently listen to him. As he left, he mentioned that this was the end of their twisted friendship, and Raoul should watch from the other side of the world as he succeeded. Raoul was then brought to the square for execution, leading to his current state. After finishing his story, Raoul laughed loudly, unable to contain himself at Wendell's expression. But Wendell knew well that Raoul always acted on the principle of blood for blood, so he wouldn't kill him. However, he didn't realize that inside Raoul was Taylor, boiling with hatred and waiting for a chance to end him. Today, Raoul would give Wendell a unique performance, a spectacular arena. Raoul announced that he would use Wendell for a highly skilled and unique show in front of today's audience. Only now did Wendell understand the power of black magic. The audience, filled with demon slaves, watched intently. Raoul asked everyone to feel the performance with their hearts as he was about to begin. The first actor was Allingham, sitting bewildered on the ground, not understanding what was happening. Mentioned by name, Allingham retreated in fear, like a dog about to be slaughtered. He begged to give up everything he had just for Raoul to spare his life this time. It seems like all the rich ones about to die say this. Raoul wanted to tell Allingham about the priests who crawled on the ground begging for their lives until they were burned to ashes. Unfortunately, since Allingham hadn't directly harmed Raoul, he couldn't kill him. Allingham had only invested money in Lord DaCosta's research institute and made Raoul's teammate go mad. But that wasn't enough reason for Raoul to kill him. Therefore, Raoul decided to leave this revenge to someone else and witness it publicly in the arena. Now it was Taylor's moment to perform, and she would seize this opportunity fully. Taylor originally intended to take revenge simply, but if Raoul wished, she would surprise him. Allingham, in fear, called Wendell's name, but to his dismay, Wendell was sitting in the stands eating an apple. Allingham needed to adapt because Wendell had always been a betrayer. Raoul watched happily as Taylor used her power to call the demon slaves to rise up and return what Allingham had done to them. Groups went down in turns to punish him in the same way he had done to them. First, they stripped him and scrubbed him harshly until his skin bled. Then, the boys would castrate him, as all the children who came there had been treated. The terrifying scene unfolded before their eyes, but it only excited the children more. Taylor was now completely different, no longer timid or scared to take a life. She laughed with delight seeing Allingham tortured by the children to the point of a living death. This was what Raoul wanted to see in his small teammate, a burning flame of hatred for justice. He screamed in agony and despair as he saw his own flesh being trampled mercilessly. To Taylor, that part of him was too filthy, so it made sense to clean it up like that. Many girls had died because of his extreme perversion, so this was a fitting punishment. A numbing pain overwhelmed him, making him think he was dead. But the things he had done were typical of a pervert. Raoul joyfully said he would teach Taylor a few more tricks to finish off this scoundrel. Then the children took turns playing with Allingham's body as if it were a discarded toy. His eyes were gouged out, his skin was scraped with nails, and his limbs were cut off piece by piece. This scene, though horrifying, filled Raoul with immense satisfaction and pleasure. Taylor's performance ended, making way for Raoul to take over. It was clear that Taylor had grown a lot in the art of revenge. Now the attention turned to the next character, Wendell, and Raoul approached him with delight. Wendell said he had witnessed enough revenge and was now busy, so he would leave. But how could Raoul let Wendell leave so easily when the culprit was sitting right there? Raoul might have acted on the principle of blood for blood, but he was no longer a hero. He would do what he wanted, not caring about debts to be paid. Wendell then realized his doom and showed extreme fear on his face. If Raoul were still a hero, he would strictly adhere to that rule. But the heroic Raoul had long died, so any hope of mercy from him was a vain fantasy. The person standing before Wendell was just a mad avenger. Wendell had betrayed his trust by believing in the hero Raoul used to be. But that was only if Wendell wasn't a great wizard himself, who could use his magic to teleport away. Before leaving, he mockingly told Raoul he couldn't follow and encouraged him to try harder. He teleported back to the starting point, feeling confident about easily escaping the illusion. He just needed to find another merchant to invest in. He knew he had to quickly return to the capital to find a new safe haven. But before he could act, Raoul appeared beside him with a bright smile. If Wendell could escape, so could he follow. Without further delay, Raoul suggested they continue the unfinished performance. Every escape route of Wendell was effectively blocked by Raoul, trapping him in a spatial loop from which he found it difficult to escape. In just a few seconds, Raoul grabbed Wendell by the neck and transported him back to the arena, which appeared slightly altered. Only upon seeing Allingham's corpse beneath him did Wendell accept the grim reality and realized he had to stand and fight. However, the audience in the stands now included not only demonic slaves but also nobles and citizens of the capital. It would have been a pity if these people missed the battle between the great sorcerer and the former hero. The cheers and encouragement from the spectators piled pressure on Wendell, who knew he couldn't afford to lose this match. Everyone had their bets on Wendell, believing in his resounding victory. These people had already planned to hire Wendell as the face of their stores, boosting his fame to its zenith and garnering unconditional adoration. But as he was still grappling with the situation, Raoul overwhelmed him with a series of rapid attacks. Despite being a great sorcerer, Wendell had to remember who the real hero was. Waiting for Wendell to regain his confidence and composure, he then unleashed a magical attack, hurling fiery flames towards Raoul. The arena exploded with excitement witnessing the sorcerer's power, with the crowd ceaselessly praising Wendell to the skies, unaware that he was nearly reduced to a mere corpse. Raoul emerged unscathed from the hellfire Wendell had conjured, leaving Wendell in disbelief, as he had focused all his power into the attack. If Wendell's turn to attack was over, it was now Raoul's time to unleash his power. He cast a dark spell to drain all of Wendell's mana towards himself, surprisingly depleting it quickly. This was unexpected for a sorcerer of Wendell's caliber, who was revered and celebrated. Seeing Wendell unable to wield his power left the audience confused and unsure of what was happening below. They couldn't believe that he was incapable, thinking he was just concealing his true strength. Everyone knew Wendell was the strongest in the kingdom, having defeated the Demon King himself. However, valuing his honor, Wendell quickly clarified to the audience that he was just yet to make his move. Unfortunately, Wendell's words only served to work against him as Raoul had no intention of holding back. In agony, Wendell pleaded with Raoul, claiming he had never harmed any of the enslaved demons. But the blood-for-blood law was merely a psychological trap Raoul had set for Wendell. The first thing Raoul did was to help Wendell out of his clothes at that moment. Wendell, embarrassed and enraged by the murmurs of awe from the audience, swung a punch at Raoul but missed. The moment a great sorcerer resorted to fists was a clear sign of his helplessness. The next game Raoul played was to scrub Wendell's body, which in reality meant slashing it with his sword, marking it with cuts all over. Wendell was bound by invisible ropes, rendering him motionless and subjected to extreme torture. The innocent, lovely girls in the stands, seeing their idol in such a state, expressed their pity. Raoul then revealed Wendell's true nature to these girls. On his way to battles, Wendell mercilessly killed every girl he had been with. This shocking truth left the girls stunned and in disbelief. Wendell used the nobility to polish his own reputation and then traded in living slaves to get by. Girls targeted by him were sent to Allingham for trafficking after being sweet-talked into submission. If they resisted, he would stoop so low as to threaten them with what they held dear. The girls he completely used were sold to nobles as playthings, and then murdered. The corpses of these pitifully murdered girls stemmed from his actions. The nobles in the audience, realizing they could no longer stay, quickly slipped away. Before leaving, they did not miss the chance to throw a few taunts at Wendell, lying bloodied and beaten. Seeing the entire audience turn their backs on him, with some even demanding his immediate castration, Wendell was in despair. Raoul, obliged to fulfill the crowd's wish, seemed to take pleasure in Wendell's attempts to defend himself, adding to his amusement. Now, no matter how hard Wendell tried, his magic failed to manifest, driving him into a state of madness. His current helpless situation mirrored what Raoul had once endured. At this moment, Raoul, wielding a gigantic pair of scissors, decided to play the role of divine retribution. However, there was a challenge for Wendell involving a foul-smelling bucket filled with slimy hair from the stomachs of many people. If Wendell could submerge his head in it for 3 seconds, he would be spared the castration. Yet, upon dipping his head, Wendell couldn't bear it and quickly pulled back. As a result, while his head was in the bucket, blood gushed from his lower body like a fountain. The great sorcerer of the Kingdom of Curse finally received the punishment he deserved. But suddenly, Wendell resurrected, standing in the arena as if what had just happened was a dream. Raoul cheerfully inquired how his friend felt about his recent death experience. Wendell, still in disbelief, struggled to comprehend the pain he had just endured. Raoul, with glee, pulled out a book, the first page of which depicted Wendell's death with blood spurting out. However, Raoul was not one to let Wendell off so easily and prepared for the next act. Raoul had specially summoned priests from the church to serve Wendell. Seeing Wendell's horrified, blood-drained face, Raoul couldn't help but laugh. He reassured Wendell to relax and enjoy, as many more entertaining acts awaited him. Raoul pushed Wendell towards the priests, who were eagerly waiting like dogs for a tasty bone. For priests, armed with spiked clubs, were eager to brutalize Wendell in a manner too gruesome to imagine, reflecting the cruelty Wendell himself had once inflicted on the unfortunate Claire. She had been abused while pregnant and used by Wendell for his amusement with Raoul. Raoul must have felt deep hatred and satisfaction hearing Wendell's screams, which also instilled fear in Taylor, witnessing Raoul's near loss of control. But all that Raoul did was create an illusion for Wendell to endure. He wanted to fill the book with various forms of torture that he had inflicted on Wendell. Wendell deserved to experience these torments, and Raoul took great pleasure in seeing him pay the price. However, soon after, Wendell was brought back from the dead, to the utter astonishment of Taylor. Raoul described this magic as an illusion within an illusion, trapping the victim in an unbearable scenario, forcing them to surrender. Wendell painfully endured more relentless punishments from Raoul. One such game involved dart throwing, where Wendell became the target for Raoul to throw 100 darts at. Once Wendell was battered and bruised, he was resurrected again to start a new game. The book in Taylor's hands grew thicker as more and more punishments were recorded. For Raoul, only after Wendell had endured 1,000 punishments before dying would he be allowed to die seriously. But suddenly, Wendell regained his composure and decided to confront Raoul once more. He was delighted to have escaped the illusion within an illusion using his own strength. Wendell rejoiced at escaping the painful cycle of death without reaching the 1,000th time as Raoul had stated. Taylor was anxious and puzzled, not understanding how Wendell could have escaped the remaining magic. Raoul, however, remained calm, knowing exactly what he was doing. Moments later, Wendell collapsed in pain, having made the biggest mistake. He thought he had escaped the illusion, but that belief was the most terrifying illusion of all. Wendell naively believed he could escape after 1,000 deaths. Raoul laughed heartily, while Taylor still couldn't quite grasp what was happening. It turned out that Raoul had always adhered to the principle of blood for blood, using deception to torture Wendell. The question arose why Raoul would resort to lies when he had the power to openly torture Wendell. But for Raoul, there was no fun in simply killing Wendell too many times. The slightest hope of escape prevents a person from falling into utter despair. Raoul's actions were driven by a desire for retribution against Wendell, who had deceived him repeatedly since childhood. He wanted Wendell to endure the most agonizing punishments slowly and gradually. By the 74th iteration, Wendell was crawling on the ground, unable to stand, longing for a quick release. His abdomen swelled and burst, giving birth to a monstrous entity. Taylor, holding the book, marveled at the horrific and unbelievable deaths. Raoul was pleased to see Wendell clinging to the last shred of hope that he would be released after 1,000 torments. Raoul had once clung to such hope, only to realize later that it was a fool's errand. Taylor stood by, watching the death count rise, filled with fear. If a great sorcerer like Wendell was brought to his knees, how could she possibly cope? The count had exceeded 2,000, with no sign of stopping, driving Wendell to madness. He knew he was deceived but could do nothing but accept it. This time, Wendell's torment was a revisit to his childhood, a time before he knew Raoul. As he was bullied by other children, Raoul had come to his rescue. Wendell's regret came too late, leaving him powerless and witnessing his own downfall. This was the price for what he had done to the person he once considered a friend. Seeing Wendell's desiccated corpse brought a satisfied smile to Raoul's face, finally releasing him from the burden of Wendell's betrayal. Raoul decided to take Wendell's body to what he considered a laboratory, to indulge in his own pleasures. The enslaved children in the stands, discontented, wanted Raoul to leave Wendell to them. They intended to teach him about respect and worldly hell. However, their revenge was directed more towards Allingham than Wendell. They had to remember that without Raoul, they were powerless. Eventually, they accepted their new, freer lives with joy. Everyone agreed to meet in the Grand Hall to bid farewell to the demonic slaves being taken away. However, in a sudden twist, Taylor turned against Raoul, holding a knife to his throat, intending to end the hero's life. From the beginning, she had never considered Raoul an ally, let alone a comrade in arms. Indeed, the children were freed and Allingham was killed, but Taylor was not content to let Raoul live on. In a split second, she replaced Wendell's position, lying motionless on Raoul's back. Yet, she found herself surprisingly in Raoul's arms a moment later. The knife pressed against her throat served as a reminder not to betray others, especially not Raoul. He had anticipated this, so there was no surprise for him, only for Taylor. Her intentions weren't malevolent. If they were, she would have acted long ago. Raoul noticed that she was just an ordinary country girl, nothing remarkable. If he removed her rustic appearance, she would be a person with two illusions. This intrigued Raoul, as he finally found someone compatible with him. Faced with the choice between being unmasked by Raoul or shedding her disguise herself, Taylor chose to reveal her true identity. Transforming before Raoul's eyes, she turned out to be the sister of the Demon King defeated by Raoul, Theodora. She looked quite different from Taylor, surprising Raoul a bit, but she was indeed the real enemy. Their direct meeting, Raoul and Theodora, was finally happening. Raoul couldn't help but compliment Theodora's beauty and engaged her in conversation. To exact revenge, one must prepare meticulously, and Theodora's actions had instilled fear. She came to avenge her sister and vowed to take Raoul's life. But reality differed from dreams, and her repeated stabbings hit only an illusionary shadow created by Raoul. On regaining her senses, she saw Wendell's corpse, while Raoul stood unscathed nearby, speaking eloquently. Despite her failure, Theodora's magical baiting technique was impressive. A second later, Theodora had Raoul's neck clamped between her thighs, a dagger in her hand. As she moved to stab Raoul's neck, he unexpectedly caught the dagger with his mouth. Then, a rope tightly bound Theodora against the wall, rendering her struggles futile. Raoul thought she should learn to use her brain more than her physical abilities. The idea of using a tiny dagger to assassinate Raoul was indeed ludicrous. He could easily crush Theodora given her weak strength and ineffective magic. However, Raoul admired her vengeful mindset and decided to offer a deal. In his hand, he held the key to Allingham's treasure vault, which could provide Theodora and the other slaves with a lifetime of sustenance. She could either take the key and leave or choose to futilely attempt to kill him again. Cornered and despite being untied, Theodora felt trapped and uncomfortable. Her eyes filled with the same hatred Raoul had once harbored. Raoul's empathy grew, and he soothed her with a gentle gaze. Without money, even if Raoul was killed, the demon race's life would remain difficult. Although the Demon King was dead, Theodora, with her leadership bloodline, had the responsibility to assist her people. Theodora recalled the teachings of her predecessors and, hearing Raoul's words, finally relieved herself of her burdens. She had already sacrificed a lot for the liberation of her race. Agreeing to a handshake with the hated enemy for the sake of revenge was a heroic act. However, Raoul was unaware of what had happened to the young Taylor, initially thinking Theodora had harmed her. It was all to avenge Taylor, who had saved Theodora in the past. Taylor's family was nearly destroyed after receiving a box containing her father's body. Neighbors helped, thinking her father died from a horse accident, unaware of the truth. To protect her daughter, Taylor's mother chose to hide the truth, not wanting to involve anyone, especially Taylor. A week after the funeral, Taylor's mother revealed the truth about her father's death. He died freeing enslaved demons at his workplace and took them to a doctor in the capital. Unfortunately, he was caught, and now his wife wanted to complete his last wish with Taylor. Taylor, with her transformation ability, would meet a girl with a secret door knock code of 5 taps. The demon Taylor's father saved was Theodora, sitting here now. Taylor's enthusiasm gradually bridged the gap between her and Theodora, despite initial hostility. Taylor's daily conversations with Theodora eventually became a habit. After Theodora learned about Taylor's father's fate from the doctor, she understood her mistake and apologized to Taylor for the loss her family suffered because of her. Their relationship grew closer as they shared their current needs and future plans. The long-awaited day for Taylor and her mother to travel to the capital to seek justice finally arrived. Taylor's mother informed her that the great sorcerer Wendell had agreed to meet them and introduce them to the kingdom's best lawyer. This news was incredibly significant and wonderful for them. However, after Taylor's mother and sister left, Taylor remained unaware that they were just illusions created by Allingham's men to deceive her. Theodora, uneasy about Taylor traveling alone, decided to accompany her despite the doctor's warnings. Theodora was touched by Taylor's lack of resentment and her ability to bring joy, despite having lost her loved ones because of Theodora. Taylor was like an angel who had saved Theodora's soul and body from human torture. Determined to protect Taylor's smile, Theodora vowed to guard it until her last breath. Taylor excitedly shared the news of their journey with Theodora, and they set off together. Unaware of the deceit and suffering that awaited them in the future, the two enthusiastic youngsters had to traverse a large forest to reach a safe haven for the night. They hoped to find safety there, free from worry. On their way, they unfortunately encountered 2 soldiers of Allingham. Although Taylor and her mother had suspected they were being followed, they didn't expect such a degree of surveillance. Theodora suggested hiding and then taking a different route to the shelter, but it would take a whole day and be perilously dark. Taylor volunteered to create a diversion, allowing Theodora to escape. However, Theodora, wanting to make up for Taylor's past sufferings, insisted on protecting her. Taylor broke down, recalling the moment her father bid her farewell on that fateful night. Their journey, filled with challenges and emotions, highlighted the deep bond and shared resolve between Taylor and Theodora. Taylor wondered if her father would have been less tormented if she hadn't asked him to come back to her. Theodora comforted Taylor, embracing her and gently soothing her pain. Despite everything, Taylor always smiled and treated Theodora kindly with everything she had. They promised each other to reunite safely and keep themselves protected at all costs. Then, Theodora left to mislead Allingham's men, allowing Taylor to reach the cabin where her mother and sister awaited her. Eager for the reunion, Taylor was greeted by Wendell at the cabin with a warm smile. Trusting him, she entered the ominous cabin, only to feel a surge of fear when she touched the blood-stained doorknob. Allingham thanked Wendell for dealing with the family of the unfortunate accountant he had brutally murdered. Theodora, after losing Allingham's men, returned to the cabin only to find a tragic scene: Taylor's mother and sister gruesomely killed and Taylor unable to close her eyes in death. Remembering her promise to Taylor, Theodora wept bitterly, holding Taylor's body. She swore to avenge all involved in this atrocity. Questioning her purpose, Theodora wondered why she still wanted to kill Raoul. He had helped her avenge with all his heart, surely bringing her immense satisfaction. Raoul offered her the key to Allingham's treasure vault. As the sister of the Demon King, Theodora had been overlooked, but now she had the opportunity to assert her status. Raoul, having other matters to attend to, gave her only 3 seconds to decide. Finally, swallowing her tears, Theodora accepted the key from Raoul, a decision that pleased him as he left happily. 2 months later, in the kingdom of Kurz, a large crowd gathered at the church for the trial of Christiana, known as a holy woman but with a corrupt and tainted soul. She showed no fear, smiling confidently and more lavishly made up than ever, ready to face her judgment day. Raoul returned to the capital, reuniting with the king in a joyful manner, akin to two close friends meeting after a long separation. He recounted everything he had done with those demons to the king, who couldn't hide his fascination in his eyes. The demon tribe had also been incinerated by Raoul, along with their trading camp, as in the end, they were also his enemies. Raoul reasoned that if they ever remembered how he had killed their king and sought revenge, it would be justified. Hence, eliminating them was an undeniably right choice. The king was overjoyed to hear these stories and had his own exciting news to share with Raoul. This news involved the lascivious Saint Christiana. Raoul had already heard about it. The news had spread remarkably fast. She had been arrested for using her dark magic to charm the princess in the square that day. Since then, the public had been relentlessly cursing her, viewing her as nothing less than a demon incarnate. Due to the overwhelming public pressure, her trial had to be moved up earlier than planned. However, before the trial, the king had used some special methods to hear her true feelings. She had merged with the lasciviousness of a monstrous and hideous demon. The friction of their bodies made her so unbearably hot that she had to release the demon inside her. But at that very moment, the holy magic was activated, and she easily killed the monster. Indeed, the holy magic was terrifying, making everyone wary. There were many reasons for the king to also eliminate Raoul right then, but he chose not to do so. Raoul jokingly brought up Victoria, infuriating the king as she was a stain on his life. Angrily, the king ordered Raoul to quickly go see Victoria before her execution. Raoul left for the dungeon where the beautiful Saint Christiana was being held, awaiting her trial. The king smiled in satisfaction, feeling that Raoul was indeed a valuable pawn. But he was unaware that Raoul had seen through all his inner calculations. Christiana was locked in the dungeon, naked, bestowing her blessings upon the men with her utterly lascivious body. Raoul could only shake his head in dismay, wondering how she could be called a saint. The saint, with her seductive body, offered herself to the jailers, momentarily lowering their guard. They believed she was too inflamed with desire to escape even if the door opened. However, as soon as the door opened, Raoul was there behind them, reminding them of their careless behavior. He warned them against being so easily beguiled by such things. They left, giving Raoul and the saint space to talk. The saint appeared frightened because she had been violated by the jailers, but Raoul knew her true nature. The lasciviousness on her face was unmistakable, and Raoul found it repulsive. What she did was use her holy magic to break down people's defenses and infuse them with lust. Everyone who met her was bewitched and followed her unconditionally because of this. She approached Raoul, wanting him to dress her, but all she got was a sack to cover her body. She had approached General Brown, exploiting his weakness, his children. With Wendell, she claimed to be a messenger of the gods, thus urging him to turn Raoul into a pawn. Her method was to joyfully whisper into her victims' ears, weakening their minds, and thereby exposing their darkest desires hidden deep within. She called this her way of bestowing divine blessings, her means of salvation. But tomorrow was the day her sins would be exposed, and Raoul didn't care. She came into this world with the mission to send sinners to hell, so this was just a confirmation of her fulfilling her role. Raoul was indifferent to whatever she would endure the next day. From the beginning, everything had been orchestrated by Christiana, as she sowed evil thoughts in everyone's minds. Christiana knew why Raoul was there. She was finally getting the punishment she deserved. Her lasciviousness even in accepting punishment from Raoul intrigued him. He would have to prepare well for their first and last meeting. Finally, the day of Christiana's trial arrived, and she seemed to relish the moment without a trace of fear. The first witness was her aunt, whose testimony shocked everyone present. Christiana had brainwashed her own parents and then burned them alive under the guise of purifying their lives, showing no mercy. Moreover, she stood smiling joyfully as she watched her parents engulfed in flames. The second witness was a soldier who saw his comrades being seduced into a mindless state. He had watched from behind a door as his comrades suddenly surrounded the saint and savagely killed each other. The soldiers died around the saint who was in ecstasy, unable to stop. He had been afraid to speak out, fearing the accusation of slander against someone of saintly status. But surely, those present could somewhat understand his feelings. The third witness was a priest who saw Christiana as nothing more than a demon. A betrothed princess of a certain kingdom had gone mad without reason, transforming from a demure girl to a crazed woman unable to control her actions. She later became pregnant with a child of unknown paternity, bearing a bizarre appearance. The despairing prince then killed his fiancée and brutally slaughtered all his kin without mercy. The kingdom fell into ruin and was lost to history, all orchestrated by the saint. But Christiana claimed she only helped the princess to be loved by many at once. She argued that it was unfair for women to be confined to loving only one person for their entire lives. Regarding her parents, her aunt couldn't have seen the joy on their faces as they were consumed by flames. The soldiers, too, were happy to join the saint in such a bloodthirsty feast. She felt her presence was humanity's salvation. But if these people wanted her dead, she would die to make them happy. The onlookers were infuriated, feeling manipulated into believing they were guilty. At this moment, Christiana's obese and unattractive lawyer appeared to defend her, rationalizing her misdeeds. The lawyer spoke at length, attempting to prove that the aforementioned events had no relation to the deaths. He argued that they were mere bystanders, unable to confirm the truth in this matter. He anticipated a reward of rejoicing with the saint once more if he succeeded this time. However, at this moment, Raoul stepped in, knowing that the king had intervened in the matter. He confidently swore to speak only the truth without deceiving himself about anything. Raoul looked on with satisfaction as the process of convicting the saint began. Far from being scared, she welcomed the proceedings with joy, a delight for Raoul to punish her. Indeed, she appeared pure and gentle on the outside, but inside, she was a true devil. She behaved properly as a saint and was even famous. However, behind her facade, she preyed on soldiers whom she had healed with her holy magic, inciting them to fight each other for her body. Yet, all her arguments centered on her being a savior to everyone. Even her actions towards her parents and the soldiers had supposedly good intentions. Christiana had repeatedly offered Raoul the chance for heavenly redemption, but he chose to descend here for revenge. But this only made Raoul scoff at her, as he was actually returning from the dead, from hell itself. It was absurd to suggest his soul was welcomed in heaven. The obese lawyer became furious when his words were disregarded and taken lightly. No one was allowed to speak ill of his saint, perhaps blinded by her physical allure. He was famous in the kingdom as an undefeated lawyer, amassing wealth through his victories. However, Raoul knew he specialized in fabricating exculpatory evidence for his clients. For Lawyer Sim, a little bribe to the forensic team meant a guaranteed success. No one could present evidence against him and the saint at this moment. But Raoul cleverly questioned him about the reason why the saint was brought to trial today. The only reason was that she had used her holy magic on the princess to manipulate Victoria. Raoul declared that he would present clear evidence to show that the saint standing here was indeed guilty. Lawyer Sim chuckled in delight, knowing that the only potential witness was the princess, but she had been killed, hadn't she? Furthermore, it was Raoul who had killed her in a very ostentatious and gruesome manner. But what if Raoul said that she had not died and was still living well in his own land? As soon as he finished speaking, Raoul brought in a corpse crawling with maggots, missing limbs, none other than Princess Victoria. Christiana's face flushed with excitement at the sight. The scene made everyone present feel nauseated, but curiosity drew them in. Now, the princess herself would be the proof of the saint's crimes, and no one could dispute it. The disgust was evident on everyone's faces at the sight of the decomposing corpse of the princess. She had been nailed mercilessly to a cross by Raoul, exposed to sun and rain. But as she could not give testimony now, the only option was an autopsy. Lawyer Sim thought it simple, just bribe the forensic team and everything would be fine. However, when the old man approached the princess's body, he immediately recognized the signs of holy magic. He continuously presented real evidence that infuriated Sim. He dared to betray the lawyer, but unexpectedly, he also revealed the tricks and manipulations Sim had used. The more cases Sim won, the higher his credibility, which meant the money he earned was becoming frighteningly substantial. The lawyer, unable to accept this outcome, turned to accuse Raoul of using magic. He claimed Raoul had bewitched the examiner to speak the truth, a ludicrous accusation that amused Raoul. He suggested bringing in other examiners to recheck the old man. A woman stepped forward, confirming there were no signs of magic on the man. Moreover, The corpses of the soldiers were confirmed to be covered with holy magic. These men had indeed been affected by the same kind of dark magic as the princess and were controlled by the saint. The lawyer wanted to say more, but the court ordered him to be silent. The court would decide his fate soon enough, no need to rush. For Raoul, this was the just retribution for the deeds he had committed. A corrupt legal system suited a corrupt country. The lawyer pleaded with the saint for one more chance, asking her help to escape punishment this time. The saint cheerfully agreed to help him and whispered a plan in his ear to preserve his undefeated reputation. Just a second later, he laughed heartily and rushed to the second floor of the building. Then he shouted "undefeated" and jumped out of the window, stunning everyone present. That was his end, following the saint's advice and living a wicked life of deceit. Witnessing the lawyer's death, there were no more excuses for Christiana. The people, seeing Sim's body, realized that the saint was truly a devil. Those enchanted by her had gone mad and turned more malevolent than ever. They vehemently demanded the execution of the wicked witch. She was to pay for her crimes, yet she showed no fear. She believed that these deaths were their salvation. The happy expression on the lawyer's face seemed to confirm her belief. She proclaimed that even though the souls of these people were tainted, she, being magnanimous, would not hold it against them. If her death could bring salvation to everyone, she was more than ready for it. It must be said that this woman's thoughts are truly perverse and terrifying. She was willing to die as long as a few more people struggled in a sea of blood with her. These words terrified everyone because they did not want to die, and they continuously demanded her execution. To quell the public uproar, the judge quickly sentenced her to be burned alive, a verdict everyone anticipated. Just a few days later, a solemn event took place in Auerbach Square, eagerly awaited by many. The crowd below was restless, recalling her crimes. Despite being burned alive, she showed no pain. Instead, she smiled brightly, considering it a liberation for the ignorant masses below. Their rage intensified as she seemed unaffected by the flames that charred her. Raoul brought her and the cross to what he called his collection. He told her to descend to hell first and wait for him to follow immediately. Only then would her real hell begin. But then, a sudden arrow shot through Raoul's heart, making him cough up blood unexpectedly. The arrow came from Theodora, who was ecstatic to have achieved her goal. She had vowed to avenge her sister and her tribe, despite being underestimated. She hung Raoul up like he had done to the princess. Using the small dagger from before, she ended him and sat there, watching as animals came to scavenge his body. She was pleased with her plan, seeing that after 5 days, Raoul's body was missing its lower half. But why did she now feel such emptiness inside?